A 13-year-old boy walks alone through freezing darkness toward the most dangerous motorcycle compound in Ridgecrest County. The Harleys idle like predators breathing in their sleep. Leather-clad men with scars older than his lifetime watch from the shadows, and not one of them moves. The boy is starving. He hasn't eaten in 3 days. But he doesn't beg. He says 5 words that will silence every man in that room and set into motion a chain of events that no one, not the school that abandoned him, not the system that forgot him, not even the brotherhood itself, could have predicted. What happens next will shatter you. Stay with me until the very end of this story. If it hits you the way it hit me, drop a like, leave a comment, tell me what city you're watching from. And let's ride. The thermometer outside the Crossroads Fuel and Feed read 11 degrees. The kind of cold that didn't negotiate. It entered through bootlaces and collar gaps and the spaces between ribs where hunger had already hollowed everything soft. Eli Mercer felt it in his teeth, in his fingertips, in the place behind his sternum where something used to feel warm but hadn't in a long time. He stood at the edge of the gravel lot and stared at the compound across the county road. The Iron Saints Motorcycle Club. Even in Ridgecrest, where people minded their own business the way they minded fences, religiously, everyone knew about the Saints, the low thunder of straight-piped Harleys rolling through town on Thursday nights, the leather vests with the faded insignia, a cracked iron cross wrapped in thornless vine. The stories. Some true, most inflated, all carrying the same undercurrent. These were not men you approached without invitation. Eli had no invitation. He had no coat either. Just a hoodie, 2 sizes too large that smelled like mildew, and the kind of silence that accumulates in houses where the electricity has been off for 9 days. His mother hadn't come out of her bedroom since Tuesday, or maybe Monday. The days had started bleeding together the way cold water bleeds through drywall, slow, invisible, ruinous. He crossed the road. The compound sat behind a corrugated metal fence topped with razor wire that caught the first pale suggestion of dawn. Beyond it, a cluster of low buildings, the main clubhouse, a garage bay with 4 lifts, a storage shed with a padlocked door, and a smaller structure with a chimney that trailed thin smoke into the gray sky. The diner. He could smell it from 40 yards out. Bacon, coffee, toast with actual butter. The smell hit his empty stomach like a fist. He pushed through the gate. 2 men sat on a bench near the garage entrance, cigarettes glowing in cupped hands. One was enormous, 6'4" at least, with a beard that had gone silver at the jaw and hands that looked like they'd been rebuilt from industrial parts. The other was leaner, younger, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, like a sentence someone had started and never finished. They watched the boy approach the way wolves watch a rabbit enter the clearing, not with hunger, with curiosity. And something colder, assessment. Eli stopped 10 feet away. His breath came out in small white bursts. His hands were shaking, and he shoved them into the hoodie's front pocket to hide it. The tremor wasn't from cold. It was from the specific terror of standing in front of men who looked like they could end everything about you without raising their voices. "You lost, kid?" the big one said. His voice was like gravel being poured into a metal drum. Eli shook his head. Then what? The boy's jaw tightened. He'd rehearsed this on the walk over. 3 miles in the dark, every step a negotiation between pride and desperation, and he'd settled on exactly what to say. No begging. His father had begged. Before he left. Before the truck pulled out of the driveway and the taillight shrank to nothing and his mother locked the bedroom door for the first time. Begging was the last thing his father did before becoming no one. "Let me earn a sandwich," Eli said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. The lean one with the scar looked at the big one. The big one looked at the boy. Somewhere inside the clubhouse, a radio played low. Old country, the kind with steel guitar and regret. A Harley ticked as its engine cooled near the garage door, the metal contracting in the cold like knuckles cracking. "Earn," the big one repeated. Not a question, a taste of the word. "Yes, sir." "You know where you are?" "Yes, sir." "And you walked here?" "Yes, sir." The lean one flicked his cigarette into the gravel. "Kid's got either guts or brain damage." He said it to no one in particular, maybe to the cold itself. The door to the diner opened. Light spilled out. Warm, yellow, the kind of light that promises things cold air can't deliver. A woman stood in the frame. Mid-50s, short-cropped hair the color of gunmetal. A face that had been beautiful once and was now something more useful. Structured, watchful, stripped of anything decorative. She wore a canvas apron over a thermal shirt, and her forearms carried scars that ran parallel, surgical, deliberate. The kind that come from years of field medicine performed under conditions no one should have to describe twice. Raina Cross, club matriarch, former Army combat medic, 3rd Infantry Division, 2 deployments that she never discussed, and 1 medical discharge that she discussed even less. She ran the compound's kitchen the way she'd run triage, with economy, precision, and an absolute intolerance for waste. She looked at Eli the way she looked at everything, without sentiment, without softness, but with a diagnostic attention that missed nothing. The oversized hoodie, the shoes held together with duct tape at the left sole, the hollowed cheeks, the way he held his shoulders high and tight, not from cold, but from the chronic tension of a body that had learned to expect impact. "Who are you?" she said. It wasn't a question either. "Eli Mercer." "Mercer." She said the name like she was checking it against a file. "Darla Mercer's boy?" He nodded once. Something moved behind Raina's eyes, something quick and controlled, like a door opening and closing in the same breath. Everyone in Ridgecrest knew about Darla Mercer. The layoff from the canning plant, the husband who vanished owing money to people who didn't forget debts. The slow, visible collapse that neighbors watched through curtains but never interrupted because intervening in someone else's drowning felt too much like admitting you might be next. Raina looked at the 2 men on the bench. The big one, his name was Truax, road captain, 22 years patched, gave a slight shrug that carried no opinion. The lean one, Devlin, just lit another cigarette. "You said earn," Raina said to the boy. "Yes, ma'am." She disappeared inside for 4 seconds, came back with a plastic bucket, a stiff bristled brush, and a bottle of industrial degreaser. She pointed toward the line of motorcycles parked along the east wall of the garage. 8 Harleys, caked in the red-brown mud of Ridgecrest County's back roads, road salt crusted on the pipes, grime packed into every crevice of every engine. Start with the softail on the end. Don't touch the throttle cables. Don't move anything on the handlebars. You scratch paint, you're done. Eli took the bucket without a word. He worked for 3 hours. The cold turned his fingers white, then red, then a color that didn't have a name. The degreaser burned the cracks in his knuckles. He knelt on frozen gravel that bit through his jeans at the knees. Inside the diner, he could hear the sounds of breakfast, plates clattering, low conversation, the hiss of something frying on a flat-top grill. The smell was constant and merciless. He didn't stop. Truax watched from the bench for the first hour, then went inside. Devlin watched for 20 minutes, then walked to the garage and started working on a transmission without saying a word. Other members drifted past. A heavy-set man with a prosthetic leg and a Tennessee Titans cap, a wiry older man with reading glasses and oil-stained fingers, a younger guy with full-sleeve tattoos who looked at Eli with something between suspicion and recognition. None of them spoke to him. None of them told him to leave. At 9:15, Raina came out with a plate. A sandwich, thick-cut bacon, fried egg, sharp cheddar on sourdough grilled until the edges were dark and crisp. A cup of black coffee that steamed in the frozen air. She set both on the wooden bench where Truax had been sitting. "Eat," she said. "Then finish the last 2. Eli sat down. He picked up the sandwich. His hands were shaking so badly that the first bite nearly missed his mouth. The bacon was smoky and too salty, and the egg yolk broke across his tongue, and the bread was warm, and he bit down on the inside of his cheek to keep his eyes from doing something he couldn't afford. He ate the entire sandwich in under 2 minutes, drank the coffee, even though it burned his throat, sat for exactly 30 seconds, then stood up and went back to the last 2 bikes. He finished at 10:41. Raina inspected every motorcycle. She ran a finger along a fender, checked the spokes, crouched to examine the undercarriage of the Road King with the custom pipes. She said nothing for a long time. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Don't be late." That was it. No praise, no warmth, no welcome speech, just a schedule. just an expectation. Just the thinnest possible thread of structure thrown to a boy who had been drowning in the absence of it. Eli walked home in daylight, 3 miles. His hands ached, his knees were raw. The cold had settled into his bones like a tenant with no intention of leaving. But his stomach was full, and someone had told him to come back. He came back. Every morning. 5:30, before the first gray light cracked the horizon. He walked the 3 miles in darkness, arrived at the compound gate, and found work waiting. Raina never assigned him the same task twice in a row. Monday was bikes. Tuesday was mopping the diner floor, the old plank wood that groaned under boots and smelled like decades of spilled coffee and motor oil. Wednesday was sorting bolts in the garage, arranging them by size into labeled bins that Eli couldn't read but memorized by shape and diameter. Thursday was kitchen prep, washing vegetables, scrubbing the flat top, learning to crack eggs one-handed because Raina said 2 hands was a waste of motion. He never complained, never asked for more than what was offered, never lingered after the work was done. The club watched. That was the thing about the Iron Saints that outsiders never understood. The leather, the bikes, the reputation, all of it was scaffolding around something quieter, a system of observation, of patience, of decisions made slowly because the men and women who wore the patch had all, in different ways, been failed by systems that moved too fast, courts that processed, hospitals that discharged, commands that deployed. Speed was the language of institutions. The Saints spoke something older. Boone Keller noticed first. He was the club's chief mechanic, a title that sounded administrative but in practice meant he spent 14 hours a day inside the garage bay with his hands buried in engines, his back to the world, his silence so complete that newer members sometimes forgot he was there. 41 years old, former Marine, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, 2 tours in Helmand Province. He came home with all his limbs and none of his sleep. The nightmares lived in his hands, a tremor that came and went, sometimes fine enough to thread a needle, sometimes bad enough to make a coffee cup feel like a negotiation. He never talked about what happened in the valley. The official record said his squad took fire during a routine patrol. The unofficial record, the one that lived behind his eyes and in the way he sometimes stared at doorways as if measuring the distance to an exit, said something else entirely. Something about a vehicle, a child. A decision made in 2/5 of a second that was either right or wrong, depending on which side of the trigger you stood on. Boone had been standing on the wrong side for 7 years. He noticed Eli on the 4th day. The boy was in the garage sorting the bolt bins. Boone was rebuilding a carburetor at the far bench, not paying attention, or appearing not to. But he saw the kid pause at a bin labeled 3/8-16. Eli stared at the label, his lips moved slightly, his brow furrowed. Then he picked up a bolt, measured it against his thumbnail, a trick someone must have taught him, and dropped it in the correct bin. He hadn't read the label. He'd solved the problem around it. Boone watched this happen 6 more times over the next hour. Every label, same pattern. The hesitation, the lip movement, the workaround. The boy could identify a 5/16 flange bolt from a 3/8 hex bolt by feel alone, could match thread pitch to nut size by testing the first 2 rotations, could organize an entire wall of hardware with mechanical precision, but couldn't read the word washer. Boone said nothing that day, or the next. On the 6th day, he left a motorcycle repair manual open on the workbench. A basic one, mostly diagrams, exploded views of engine assemblies, with labels in large print. He positioned it where Eli would find it during cleanup. The boy picked it up, turned it over, opened to a random page, a diagram of a V-twin engine with labeled parts. His eyes went to the images immediately, tracing the lines, understanding the relationships between components with an instinct that Boone recognized. The instinct of someone who thinks in shapes, not words. Then his eyes moved to the text, and stopped. His jaw tightened, the same tightening Boone had seen at the bolt bins, the same architecture of shame, subtle, practiced, load-bearing. This wasn't a boy who couldn't read because no one had tried to teach him. This was a boy who couldn't read because something in the wiring was different, and every classroom he'd ever sat in had treated that difference as deficiency, and every report card had confirmed it, and every teacher who moved on to the next student had added another brick to the wall between Eli Mercer and the printed word. Boone walked over, didn't sit down, didn't make it a moment. He just pointed at the diagram of the cylinder head and said, "That's the combustion chamber. 2 valves, intake and exhaust. The spark plug sits here." He tapped the image, then tapped the word below it. Combustion, C-O-M-B-U-S-T-I-O-N, means explosion, controlled explosion. Eli looked at him. For the first time, the boy's expression cracked. Not into tears, not into gratitude, but into something more fragile. Surprise. The surprise of being met where he stood instead of being told to stand somewhere else. "You know engines," Boone said. It wasn't a question. "Some," Eli said. "You know them better than some. You just don't know the names yet." The boy said nothing. "Names are just labels. The machine doesn't care what you call it. It cares whether you understand how it breathes." Boone picked up a wrench and went back to his bench. "Tomorrow I'll show you the timing chain. You'll want to know the word synchronization. It means making things work together." He didn't look back, didn't need to. He heard the boy close the manual carefully, not toss it, not shove it aside, and set it on the bench with both hands. The lesson started. After closing hours, when the garage was empty and the compound settled into its nocturnal rhythm of low music and distant conversation, Boone would stay. He'd pull out manuals, comics, motorcycle magazines, anything with pictures and words in combination. He never made Eli sit at a desk. They worked side by side, hands busy with actual engine parts, and the reading happened in the margins. A gasket label here, a torque specification there. The words grew from the work, rooted in something the boy's hands already understood. It was slow, brutal sometimes. Eli would hit a wall, a paragraph that refused to untangle, a sentence that rearranged itself every time he looked at it, and his face would go blank in that specific way that meant the shame was flooding back. Boone recognized the look. He'd worn it himself in VA waiting rooms, trying to fill out intake forms while his hands shook, and the fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency that sounded exactly like a specific afternoon in a specific valley in a specific country he was never going back to. "Take a breath," Boone would say. "Try the next word. Skip the ones that fight you. Come back for them later." He never said it was okay. He never said it was easy. He just stayed. And somewhere in the staying, something shifted. Raina saw it too. She saw it in the kitchen, where Eli had begun arriving early enough to help with breakfast prep. The boy had a gift she hadn't expected, an intuitive understanding of flavor, of texture, of the alchemy that happens when heat meets fat meets salt meets time. He couldn't follow a written recipe, but he could taste a broth once and identify what was missing. He could watch Raina flip an egg and replicate the wrist motion on his second try. He understood the flat-top grill the way Boone understood a transmission, as a living system with moods, hotspots, rhythms. "You've cooked before," Raina said one morning, watching him layer bacon on the griddle with a spacing precision that most line cooks took months to develop. "Had to," Eli said. 2 words. They carried the weight of years. Had to. Meaning his mother hadn't. Meaning the kitchen at home was a place of absence, not abundance. Meaning this 13-year-old boy had been feeding himself, and probably her, with whatever he could find, for longer than anyone had bothered to notice. Raina didn't ask for details. She'd spent enough years in field hospitals to know that some wounds announce themselves and others hide behind competence. The kids who scream are easy to find. The ones who quietly adapt are the ones you miss until it's too late. She started teaching him, not with sympathy, with standards. Knife flat, not tilted. You'll lose a fingertip. Taste everything before it goes out. If you wouldn't eat it, don't serve it. A plate is a story. Beginning, middle, end. Don't ramble. Eli absorbed it the way dry ground absorbs rain. Fast, completely, with an almost desperate efficiency. But the world outside the compound had its own plans. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Eli found it in the mailbox between an overdue electric bill and a credit card offer addressed to his father, a man who had been gone 14 months but whose junk mail persisted with a faithfulness his presence never had. The letter was from Ridgecrest Consolidated Middle School, official letterhead. The language was careful, bureaucratic, designed to deliver damage without leaving fingerprints. Eli Mercer was being recommended for expulsion proceedings. Grounds? Chronic absenteeism, failure to meet minimum academic standards, failure to respond to multiple intervention attempts. A hearing had been scheduled for the following Friday. A parent or legal guardian was required to attend. Failure to appear would result in automatic expulsion and referral to the county's alternative education program, a phrase that, in Ridgecrest, meant a windowless room in a strip mall where truancy cases went to be forgotten. Eli read the letter 3 times. The words moved on the page the way they always did, rearranging, doubling, mocking. But he had learned enough from Boone to pin most of them down. The meaning was clear. He was about to lose the last institutional thread connecting him to a normal life. And his mother, who hadn't left the house in 11 days, who answered the bedroom door only to accept the plates of food Eli left outside it, who existed now in a darkness so complete that her son had stopped trying to describe it and started trying to simply survive it. His mother was not going to that hearing. He didn't tell Raina. He didn't tell Boone. He folded the letter into a square and put it in the pocket of his hoodie and went to the compound the next morning and worked the bikes and helped with breakfast and read 3 pages of a motorcycle manual with only 2 mistakes and said nothing about any of it. But silence has a specific weight in a room full of people who have carried their own. Devlin noticed it first. The kid's hands were wrong, not shaking, tight, clenched around the bucket handle, around the wrench, around the edge of the counter. The specific tightness of someone holding something inside that wants out. He mentioned it to Truax. Truax mentioned it to Raina. Raina didn't mention it to anyone. She watched. For 2 days, she watched the boy carry something invisible and heavy, and she waited because she'd learned in a desert on the other side of the world that you don't pull shrapnel until you know where the artery is. On Friday morning, Eli didn't come to the compound. The absence hit like a dropped wrench in a silent garage. 5:30 came and went. 6:30. Boone stood at the garage door and looked at the gate and said nothing. Raina poured coffee and didn't drink it. Truax sat on the bench and smoked and watched the road. At 7:15, Raina made a call. Not to Eli, to someone at the school district office, a woman she'd served with briefly at Fort Stewart, who now worked in student records. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When Raina hung up, her face had the expression that Boone recognized from the worst days. The triage face. The face that meant the situation was worse than it looked, and it already looked terrible. "He's got a hearing today," Raina said. "Expulsion. 9 a.m. The garage went quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture. Thick, pressurized. The silence before a decision that can't be undone. Boone set down his wrench. "He didn't tell us," he said. "No." "Because he didn't think anyone would come." Raina looked at him. That was it. That was the exact wound. Not that the boy was about to be expelled. Not that the system had failed him. Systems fail. That's what they do. That's what every person in this compound knew in their bones. The wound was simpler and worse. A 13-year-old boy had a crisis and didn't tell the only people who'd shown up for him because his entire life had taught him that telling people makes it worse. Truax stood up. "What time?" he said. 9. Truax looked at his watch, looked at the row of Harleys along the east wall. Every one of them gleaming, every one of them cleaned by a boy who couldn't read his own expulsion letter on the first try. "That's 90 minutes, Truax said. "We riding or we talking?" Raina untied her apron, walked inside, came back wearing her leather vest, the one with the medic patch on the left chest and the Iron Saints insignia on the back. The one she only wore when the club moved as one. Within 20 minutes, the compound was thunder. 11 motorcycles, 11 riders. Boone on his stripped-down Sportster with the military green tank. Truax on the Black Road King that sounded like a freight train at idle. Devlin on his dyno with the straight pipes that set off car alarms 3 blocks away. Raina on the Heritage Softail that she'd rebuilt herself over 2 winters, every bolt torqued to spec, every cable measured twice. They rode out of the compound in formation, not fast, not aggressive, deliberate. The sound preceded them down the county road like a warning and a promise simultaneously, and the people of Ridgecrest who heard it The gas station attendant, the woman walking her dog, the postal carrier on his morning route, stopped what they were doing and watched the column pass with the specific stillness that accompanies the recognition of something both dangerous and purposeful. At 8:47, Eli Mercer sat alone on a plastic chair outside the principal's office at Ridgecrest Consolidated Middle School. His hoodie was zipped to his chin. His hands were clasped between his knees. He stared at the linoleum floor and counted the black scuff marks because counting was something he could do without the letters rearranging themselves. The hearing was in 13 minutes. His mother was not coming. No one was coming. Then he heard it. Distant at first, a low, rolling growl that could have been trucks on the highway or thunder from a storm that wasn't on the forecast. But it grew, and it separated into distinct voices, individual engines, each with its own pitch and rhythm, combining into something that vibrated in the floor tiles and rattled the trophy case in the hallway, and made the secretary at the front desk look up from her computer with an expression that started as confusion and ended as something closer to alarm. Eli stood up. Through the narrow window beside the office door, he saw them pull into the school parking lot, one by one. 11 motorcycles, 11 leather vests, the Iron Saints insignia catching the pale winter light, exhaust rising in white columns against the gray sky. And at the front of the formation, Raina Cross, pulling off her gloves, swinging one leg over the seat, and walking toward the school entrance with a stride that was neither hurried nor casual, but carried the specific authority of a woman who had once walked into a forward operating base under mortar fire to retrieve a wounded soldier, and who was now walking into a middle school to retrieve a wounded boy. Eli's hands unclenched for the first time in 3 days. But inside that office, behind a closed door, Principal Marjorie Hale sat with a file folder 2 inches thick, and the decision she'd already made was written on the first page in language that didn't care how many motorcycles were parked outside. The hearing hadn't started yet, and everything that mattered was about to be decided in the next 45 minutes. The hallway smelled like floor wax and institutional coffee, and the particular brand of quiet that exists only in places where adults make decisions about children's futures without consulting the children. Eli stood with his back against the cinder block wall, his eyes fixed on the double doors at the end of the corridor, watching the Iron Saints file in one at a time. Raina first, then Truax, then Boone, then 8 more, boots landing on polished linoleum with a rhythm that sounded like something between a march and a funeral procession. Their leather vests creaked in the overheated air. The hallway was built for students carrying backpacks, not for men with shoulders wide enough to brush both sides of a doorframe. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them, and every classroom door along the corridor was closed, but Eli could see faces pressed against the narrow windows, teachers, students, a janitor frozen mid-mop at the far end, all watching the column of leather and silence move through their building like weather that had walked indoors. Raina stopped in front of Eli. She didn't touch him, didn't smile. She looked at him the way she looked at a wound she was about to clean, steady, unflinching, already calculating the damage. "You should have told us," she said. Eli's jaw worked. "Didn't think? I know what you didn't think. That's why we're here." The principal's office door opened. A woman in her late 50s stepped out. Steel gray blazer, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a posture that suggested she had spent 30 years being the final word in rooms full of people who didn't want to hear it. Marjorie Hale surveyed the hallway. Her expression didn't change when she saw the bikers, but her hand moved to the doorframe, and the knuckles whitened by 2 shades. "Mrs. Mercer?" she said, looking past the leather vest for a woman who wasn't there. "Darla Mercer is unable to attend," Raina said. She stepped forward, not aggressively, with the specific measured calm of someone who understood that authority in a room is not seized, it's demonstrated. "My name is Raina Cross. I'm here as Eli's advocate." "And your relationship to the student?" "I'm the person who showed up." Hale's mouth thinned. She looked at the line of bikers filling her hallway, then back at Raina. "This is a private administrative hearing. I'm not going to conduct it in front of—" She stopped, chose her words. "A group." "You won't need to. They'll wait outside." Raina didn't turn around. Didn't need to. Truax was already angling his head toward the main entrance, and the column reversed. Silent, precise. without a single spoken command. One by one, they filed back through the double doors. Boone was the last. He paused at the threshold and looked at Eli, and something passed between them that wasn't a word and wasn't a gesture, but carried more weight than both. Then it was just Raina, Eli, and the hallway. "I should tell you," Hale said, "that without a parent or legal guardian present, this hearing has limited procedural." "I have power of attorney documentation being prepared," Raina said. It was a lie. Clean, practiced, delivered without hesitation. "In the meantime, I'm here in a community advocacy capacity. You can proceed or you can postpone, but either way, this boy is not sitting in this hallway alone." Hale stared at her for 4 seconds, then stepped aside and gestured toward the office. The room was small. A desk, 3 chairs. A filing cabinet with the rubber plant on top that was dying in a way that suggested it had been dying for years, and no one had committed to either saving it or throwing it away. On the desk sat the file folder, the one Eli had imagined from the other side of the door, thick with every failure the system had recorded, and none of the reasons behind them. Hale sat behind the desk. Raina took the chair to Eli's left. The boy sat between them, his hands pressed flat against his thighs. His breathing shallow and controlled, the breathing of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. "Let me be direct," Hale said. She opened the folder. Eli has missed 47 school days this academic year. His reading assessment scores place him at a second grade level. He has failed to complete 83% of assigned work. 3 separate intervention plans have been implemented and abandoned due to noncompliance. His teachers have documented. She flipped a page. 17 instances of classroom withdrawal, 9 instances of leaving school grounds without permission, and 1 incident involving the destruction of a textbook. "I tore it," Eli said. Both women looked at him. "The book." "I tore it. Mrs. Kendall's class." His voice was flat, not defiant, exhausted. The exhaustion of a child who has been prosecuted by paperwork. "She made me read out loud, in front of everyone. I couldn't. The words were—" He stopped. His throat moved. "I tore it, so she'd send me to the office, instead of making me keep going." The silence that followed had a different texture than the one in the hallway. This one was thinner, more fragile, like ice over deep water. Raina's hand moved half an inch toward the boy's arm, then stopped. She redirected it to the armrest of her chair. Not because she didn't want to touch him, because she knew that comfort offered at the wrong moment becomes pity, and pity was the one thing that would make him shut down completely. "Mrs. Hale," Raina said, "has anyone in this district tested Eli for a learning disability?" The principal's expression shifted, barely, a micro-adjustment around the eyes. "We follow standard assessment protocols. That's not what I asked. Has anyone, any teacher, any counselor, any administrator sat with this boy and tried to determine why he can disassemble a motorcycle carburetor but can't read the word carburetor?" "I'm not sure what motorcycle maintenance has to do with it. It has everything to do with it. This child is not stupid. This child is not lazy. This child has a brain that processes language differently, and every adult in this building has spent 3 years documenting his failures instead of diagnosing the cause." Raina's voice didn't rise. It did something worse. It got quieter, denser, like a blade being sharpened. 47 absences. "Do you know why he's absent? Because he walks 3 miles to my compound every morning to work. Because work is the only place anyone has ever told him he's competent. He leaves before dawn. He arrives here exhausted because he's already done 4 hours of labor before your first bell rings. And he does it because no one in this building, not one of you, gave him a reason to walk through your doors instead of mine." Hale removed her glasses, set them on the desk. The gesture was slow, deliberate, the body language of a woman recalibrating. "Ms. Cross, I understand your concern, but this school has limited resources, and Eli's case is not the only—" "I'm not asking about every case. I'm asking about this one. This boy. This file. What happens if you expel him?" "He would be referred to the county's alternative education. He disappears. That's what happens. He goes into a system designed to process children, not educate them. And within 6 months, he's a statistic. You know it. I know it. The only person in this room who doesn't know it is the one who should never have been put in this position. Eli stared at the floor. His hands had moved from his thighs to his knees, and his fingers were digging into the denim hard enough to leave marks. He was not crying. He was doing something harder than crying. He was sitting still while two adults discussed his future as if he were a file and not a person, and every word landed on the place inside him where the damage lived, and he held it there because holding things was what he did. Hale looked at the boy for a long time, then at the file, then at the window where the sound of idling Harleys rumbled through the glass like a low-frequency heartbeat that the building couldn't quite keep out. "What are you proposing?" Hale said. Raina leaned forward. "Probation, 60 days. I will personally ensure his attendance. I will arrange private assessment for learning disabilities at my own expense. And I will provide a structured mentorship program through my organization that addresses the gaps your school has not." "Your organization?" Hale let the words sit. "Your motorcycle club." "My community. Call it whatever makes this easier for your paperwork." The principal picked up her pen, put it down, picked it up again. The indecision was visible. A bureaucratic muscle fighting against something older and less comfortable. Compassion, maybe. Or guilt. Or the simple recognition that the woman across the desk was not bluffing, and the boy between them was not performing. And the machinery of expulsion, once started, would grind forward with the specific indifference that machinery always has. 60 days, Hale said finally. Full attendance, completed assignments. If I don't see measurable progress, this hearing reconvenes and the outcome will be different. Understood. And Ms. Cross, I'll need contact information, a phone number, an address. If I'm going to put my professional credibility behind a probationary arrangement with a motorcycle club, I need to be able to reach you. Raina took a card from her vest pocket, set it on the desk. Plain white black text, a phone number, an address. The Iron Saints insignia in the corner, small, almost discreet, like a signature that didn't need to be large to carry weight. Hale looked at it for a moment, then slid it beneath the file folder. The meeting was over. Eli walked out of the office on legs that felt borrowed from someone else. The hallway was empty now. The classroom doors still closed, the faces gone from the windows, the janitor's mop bucket abandoned near the stairwell. Through the glass doors at the end of the corridor, he could see the parking lot. The Saints were still there. 11 bikes. 11 men standing or leaning or sitting on their machines, breath visible in the cold air, cigarettes sending thin lines of smoke upward into the overcast sky. They looked like a photograph that didn't belong in a school parking lot. Too large, too weathered, too permanent against the backdrop of minivans and school buses. Raina pushed through the doors and walked toward them. Eli followed, 2 steps behind, his eyes on her boots because looking at the bikers directly felt like looking at something too bright. Truax straightened. How'd it go? 60-day probation, full attendance, full assignments, assessment for learning disability. And if he doesn't make it? Raina looked at Eli, then back at Truax. He makes it. Truax nodded once. The nod carried the weight of a contract. Not the kind written on paper, the kind that lives between people who have bled in the same direction and who understand that a promise, once spoken aloud in front of the patch, becomes something you don't break because breaking it means breaking the architecture of the only family you have left. Boone walked over. He crouched in front of Eli, knees popping, the sound loud in the cold quiet, and put himself at the boy's eye level. This close, Eli could see the details that distance usually hid. The scar tissue along Boone's left jawline, thin and white, like a river system mapped on skin. The permanent crease between his eyebrows that came from years of squinting into brightness that had nothing to do with sunlight. The tremor in his right hand, subtle today but present, always present, like a signal from a war that hadn't figured out it was over. You didn't tell me about the letter, Boone said. His voice was low, not angry, something adjacent to anger. The specific hurt of a man who had offered trust and discovered it hadn't been fully returned. I know what you didn't want. You didn't want to be a problem. You didn't want to need something. You wanted to handle it the way you've handled everything, alone, quiet, until it either fixes itself or kills you. Boone's eyes held the boy's. That's not how this works. Not anymore, you understand? Eli's chin trembled. One tremor. He locked it down immediately, the way a mechanic tightens a bolt. Fast, hard, just past the point of resistance. Yes, sir, he said. Boone stood up. His knees popped again. He put one hand on the boy's shoulder. Brief, firm, the pressure of a man who understood that touch, for some people, is a language that needs to be spoken carefully, or not at all. Then he walked back to his Sportster and threw a leg over the seat. The ride back to the compound was slower than the ride out. The urgency had dissolved into something quieter, and the formation loosened, bikes spreading across the lane, engines settling into a lower register, the column moving through Ridgecrest with the unhurried gravity of men returning from something that had cost them but hadn't broken them. Eli rode on the back of Raina's heritage Softail, a spare helmet strapped to his head, his arms around her waist, his face pressed against the leather of her vest. He could feel the engine vibrations in his chest, in his teeth, in the hollow spaces where hunger used to live, and where something else was beginning to grow. Something without a name yet, something that felt dangerous precisely because it felt like hope. And hope, in Eli's experience, was the setup for a specific kind of devastation. He held on tighter. The compound came into view. The corrugated fence, the razor wire, the thin smoke from the diner chimney. Home, or the closest thing to it. The gate opened. The bikes rolled in. Engines cut one by one, and the silence that replaced them was enormous, the way silence is always enormous after sustained noise, like a room that's suddenly too large. Eli climbed off the bike. Raina pulled off her helmet and hung it on the handlebar. Around them, the saints dispersed. Truax toward the clubhouse, Devlin toward the garage, others toward the diner where the smell of lunch had already started to build beneath the cold air. Eli. He turned. Raina was looking at him with the triage face again, but something behind it had changed. A softness she was trying to suppress because softness, in her experience, was a liability. She'd learned that in a field hospital, in a country where the sand got into everything, including the parts of you that were supposed to stay sterile. 60 days, she said. That's what we have. Do you understand what that means? I go to school. You go to school every day. You do every assignment. You let Boone help you with the reading. You eat breakfast here before you go, and you eat dinner here when you come back. And when it gets hard, and it will get hard every single day, harder than scrubbing mud off bikes in 11-degree cold, you tell someone. You don't fold it up and put it in your pocket. You don't carry it alone. That's the deal. And if I can't, you can. But if Eli, her voice sharpened, not with anger, with the specific intensity of a woman who had watched too many people die from wounds they hid. There is no if I can't. There is only the work, one day at a time, one word at a time, one plate at a time. That's how you survived before any of us knew your name, and that's how you'll survive this. The only difference is that now you're not doing it alone, and that part, she paused, her jaw tightened. That part will feel worse before it feels better, because alone is easy. Alone is what you know. Having people who show up, that's the part that's terrifying. She turned and walked toward the diner. The door closed behind her, and the sound it made, the heavy thud of wood swinging shut, carried a finality that had nothing to do with the door. Eli stood in the gravel lot. Around him, the compound breathed, engines ticking as they cooled, a wrench clanging inside the garage, the muffled sound of someone laughing inside the clubhouse, a low, rusty sound like a machine that hadn't been used in a while. The sky above was iron gray, featureless, pressing down on the rooftops with the weight of a season that wasn't finished punishing. He reached into his hoodie pocket. The letter was still there, says folded, softened by body heat, the creases wearing thin. He pulled it out, looked at it. The words swam and rearranged and fought him the way they always did, but he found the ones that mattered. Expulsion, probation. 60 days. He folded it again, smaller this time, then smaller, until it was a hard square of paper no larger than a postage stamp. He put it in his back pocket, where it would press against him every time he sat down. a reminder with a sharp edge. Then he walked to the garage. Boone was already there, bent over the carburetor he'd been rebuilding for 3 days, the radio playing low. Not country this time, but something without words, just a piano repeating a figure that sounded like a question being asked over and over without expecting an answer. Eli picked up the repair manual from the bench, opened it to the page they'd left off on, stared at the words until they stopped moving. Synchronization, he said. The word came out rough, syllable by syllable, like gravel being placed one stone at a time. Boone didn't look up from the carburetor. Good. Now use it in a sentence. Eli thought for a long time. Synchronization means making things work together. That's my definition. What's yours? The boy looked at the diagram. The timing chain, the gears, the way each tooth had to meet its counterpart at precisely the right moment, or the entire engine would tear itself apart from the inside. It means if one part is off, Eli said slowly, everything breaks. Boone set down his wrench, looked at the boy. The tremor in his hand was worse today. The cold, maybe, or the morning's adrenaline finding its exit. He pressed his palm flat against the workbench to still it. Yeah, he said. That's better. The days that followed were the hardest of Eli's life. School was a minefield. He arrived every morning at 7:45, showered at the compound, fed, dressed in clothes that Raina had sourced from somewhere without telling him where, and walked through doors that had never wanted him and still didn't. The hallways were the same, the classrooms were the same. The teachers were the same teachers who had written the reports in his file, who had documented his failures with the clinical efficiency of people trained to measure deficits rather than recognize difference. Mrs. Kendall's English class was the worst. She was not a cruel woman. She was something more dangerous. She was tired. 22 years in the same classroom, the same curriculum, the same parade of students who arrived broken and left the same way, and somewhere along the line her capacity for individual attention had calcified into a set of procedures that she followed the way a pilot follows a checklist, mechanically, thoroughly, without looking out the window. She gave Eli the same assignments as everyone else, the same reading, the same essays, the same vocabulary tests that arrived every Friday like a weekly execution. Raina had arranged the learning disability assessment, but the appointment wasn't for 3 weeks. County Mental Health Services moved at the speed of bureaucracy, which is the speed of a glacier that doesn't know people are standing in its path. In the meantime, Eli sat in the back row and fought the words. Boone helped. Every night from 7 to 9, they sat in the garage with the manual and the comics and a battered dictionary that Boone had found in the clubhouse storage room. Its spine cracked, its pages yellowed, certain entries circled in pencil by someone years ago for reasons no one remembered. They worked through the assignments together, Boone reading the questions aloud, Eli answering in sentences that Boone then helped him transcribe, word by painful word, into the lined notebooks that Raina bought in bulk from the dollar store 3 towns over. It was brutal. Not the work itself, the exposure. Every misspelled word was a wound made visible. Every sentence that took 15 minutes to write was proof of the thing Eli had spent years hiding. He'd built an entire architecture of competence around the deficit, the engine knowledge, the cooking, the physical work, the mechanical genius. And now that architecture was being dismantled, deliberately, carefully, by a man whose own architecture had been dismantled by a war and who understood that the demolition was not the cruelty. The cruelty was before. The demolition was the repair. But Eli didn't always see it that way. On the 12th day, he hit the wall. A vocabulary test, 20 words, multiple choice, 40 minutes. He stared at the paper until the letters dissolved into shapes without meaning, and the shapes rearranged into patterns that mocked the idea that language was something a human being should be able to decode, and the frustration built behind his eyes like pressure in a sealed system until something cracked. He didn't tear the paper. He didn't walk out. He did something quieter, and in some ways worse. He put his head down on the desk and went still. Not sleeping, just absent, checked out. The specific shutdown of a system that has exceeded its capacity and needs to go dark to survive. Mrs. Kendall marked it as non-participation. That evening, Eli didn't go to the compound. He walked home instead. 3 miles in the opposite direction, toward the house with the dead lawn and the mailbox full of collection notices, and the bedroom door that was always closed. He let himself in with the key he kept on a string around his neck. The kitchen was dark. The living room was dark. The hallway was dark. He stood at his mother's door and listened. Breathing, slow, rhythmic. The breathing of a person who exists but has stopped participating in existence. The television was on behind the door. Low volume, blue light leaking through the gap at the floor, the only evidence that someone was alive in there. Mom. Nothing. Mom, I need you to sign something. Nothing. It's for school. There's a form for the assessment. They need a parent's signature. The television volume dropped 1 notch, then returned. That was the answer. The full extent of Darla Mercer's engagement with her son's academic survival, a momentary adjustment of volume, followed by resumption. Eli pressed his forehead against the door. The wood was cold. He could feel the grain of it against his skin, the imperfections, the places where paint had chipped and been painted over and chipped again. Layers of repair covering layers of damage covering the original surface that no one could remember anymore. He stayed like that for 11 seconds. Then he pushed away from the door and walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Empty. A bottle of ketchup. A carton of milk 2 weeks past its date. A bag of American cheese slices that had fused together into a single orange mass. He closed the refrigerator, stood in the dark kitchen, listened to the house. The tick of the water heater, the hum of the refrigerator compressor, the wind outside pressing against windows that hadn't been properly sealed in years. The sounds of a home that was technically functioning and fundamentally broken. He didn't cry. He'd stopped crying at 11. Not because he'd run out of tears, but because tears required a witness to mean anything, and there was no one in this house who could witness anything anymore. At 6 the next morning, Boone was waiting at the compound gate, not inside the garage, at the gate. Standing beside his Sportster in the pre-dawn cold, breath visible, coffee in a thermos, the tremor in his hand hidden inside a glove. "You didn't come last night," Boone said. "I went home." "I know, Devlin drove past, saw the light on." Eli looked at him. "You had someone check on me." "We had someone drive down your street. There's a difference." "Feels the same." "It's not." Boone unscrewed the thermos cap and poured coffee into it, held it out. "The same would be knocking on your door. We didn't do that. We won't do that unless you ask. But we'll drive past, every time." Eli took the coffee. It was black and too hot, and tasted like the compound. Motor oil and old wood, and something that might have been cinnamon, but might have been memory. "The vocabulary test," Boone said. "How bad?" I put my head down. "All of it?" "All of it." Boone leaned against the gate. The metal creaked under his weight. Beyond the compound, the sky was beginning to lighten. Not with color, but with the suggestion of color, the way a bruise lightens before it heals, moving from black to purple to a yellow that looks worse than the original wound. "What happened?" The words stopped working. They do that sometimes. They just stop. Like an engine that floods. Too much fuel, no spark. Boone looked at him for a long time, then nodded slowly the way he nodded when a diagnosis was confirmed. "That's the best description of it I've ever heard." "Of what?" "Of what's going on in your head. The flooding. That's real. That's not weakness, and that's not stupidity, and that's not something you did wrong. That's wiring. And wiring can be worked with, but it can't be ignored and it can't be shamed away. The test. You'll retake it. I'll talk to Raina. She'll talk to the school. They won't let me. They will." "How do you know?" Boone's mouth did something that was almost a smile but stopped short of it, like a car that brakes just before the cliff. "Because Raina Cross doesn't ask twice." But what Boone didn't say, what he held behind his teeth the way he held everything that mattered, was that the school wasn't the only obstacle. The club was watching, not with suspicion exactly, with assessment. The Iron Saints operated on a principle as old as any brotherhood. Resources are finite. Every hour spent on Eli's reading was an hour Boone wasn't in the garage. Every morning Raina spent coordinating with the school was a morning she wasn't managing the kitchen, the supply orders, the 100 invisible tasks that kept the compound functional. The younger members, the ones who'd patched in less than 5 years ago, the ones still building their standing, had begun to notice. Mercer, a road name spoken in the third person, the way the club referred to problems. The Mercer situation. The kid. Questions framed as observations, dropped into conversation at the table during evening meetings like coins into a jar that was slowly filling. Boone's been in the garage half what he used to be. Raina went to the school again, 3rd time this month. We're running a daycare now? The words never made it to Eli's ears. That was the protocol. Club business stayed at the table, but the atmosphere shifted in ways the boy could feel without being able to name. A coolness from certain members. A shortening of sentences. The specific reduction of eye contact that tells you someone has decided you are taking more than you're giving. And beneath all of it, circling like a current under still water, was a question no one had spoken aloud, but everyone was beginning to think. What happens when the 60 days are up and the boy still can't read? 38 days remained, and the form on the kitchen counter at Eli's house, the one that required a parent's signature to authorize the learning disability assessment, sat unsigned, untouched, in a dark room where the refrigerator hummed and the water heater ticked, and a woman behind a locked door breathed in rhythms that meant survival but not living. Without that signature, there would be no diagnosis. Without a diagnosis, there would be no accommodation. And without accommodation, every test, every assignment, every word on every page would remain exactly what it had always been. A locked door with no key, in a hallway with no exit, in a building that was counting down the days until it could finally, officially, permanently close. The signature came on day 23. Not from Darla Mercer. Raina forged it. She did it at the compound's kitchen table at 4 a.m, with a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow and a sample of Darla's handwriting pulled from an old PTA sign-up sheet that the school district kept on file, a document from 5 years ago, back when Darla Mercer still attended things, still signed things, still existed in the bureaucratic ecosystem as a functioning parent. Raina studied the loops and slants for 20 minutes. Then she picked up a pen and wrote Darla's name on the consent form for the learning disability assessment with a steadiness that betrayed years of filling out field documentation under conditions far worse than guilt. She didn't tell Boone. She didn't tell Truax. She folded the form into an envelope, sealed it, and drove it to the county mental health office before sunrise in her truck. Not on the bike, because the bike attracted attention, and what she was doing required the opposite. It was a crime. She knew that with the precision of someone who had spent her adult life operating in the space between what was legal and what was necessary. Forgery of a parental signature on a medical consent document. If discovered, it wouldn't just end the probation. It would give the school grounds to involve Child Protective Services, which would trigger a home investigation, which would expose Darla's condition, which would end with Eli in the foster system before the ink dried on the intake paperwork. Raina had seen the foster system. Not from the inside, from the perimeter. Kids who came through the compound's orbit over the years, drifting in with the same hollowed-out look that Eli wore, carrying garbage bags instead of suitcases. She'd watched the system process them the way a meat grinder processes whatever's fed into it, efficiently, indiscriminately, and with no regard for what the raw material used to be. She signed the form because the alternative was watching a 13-year-old boy lose his last chance at a diagnosis that could change his life. And Raina Cross had spent enough years in enough hopeless places to know that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing stand on opposite sides of a line, and you choose based on which consequence you can live with. She could live with forgery. She could not live with watching Eli disappear. But secrets in a brotherhood have a half-life measured in days, not weeks. Devlin found out first, not because Raina told him, because Devlin paid attention to things other people missed. It was his survival mechanism, honed in a childhood that had taught him to read rooms the way prey animals read wind. He noticed that Raina drove her truck that morning instead of her bike. He noticed she was back before 5:30, which meant she'd left before 4. He noticed the county mental health office's phone number on a sticky note near the kitchen phone, and when he called it during business hours from the garage, casual, conversational, identifying himself as a family member following up on a consent form, the receptionist confirmed that yes, the Mercer consent had been received and processed. Devlin didn't say anything for 2 days. He sat with the information the way he sat with everything. In silence, at a distance, turning it over like a coin he'd found on the ground and wasn't sure was real. Then, on the 3rd day, he caught Raina alone in the diner kitchen during the dead hour between lunch cleanup and dinner prep. "You signed it," he said. Raina was scrubbing the flat-top grill. Her arm stopped mid-stroke. The metal scraper hung in her hand, grease pooling at its edge. She didn't look up. "Signed what?" "Raina." She set the scraper down, turned, leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. Not defensively, but diagnostically, the posture of a woman assessing how much damage had already spread. "Who else knows?" "Just me." "Keep it that way." "That's not how this works, and you know it." "I know exactly how this works, Devlin. I also know what happens to that boy without a diagnosis. He's got 37 days. The school isn't going to test him without parental consent. His mother isn't going to consent because his mother is not functioning. I made a call." "You made a crime." "Yes." The word sat between them like a stone dropped into a pond. Devlin leaned against the doorframe. His scar caught the overhead light, the raised tissue running from ear to mouth, a reminder of a bar fight in Tulsa that had started as someone else's problem and ended as his face. He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a cigarette, didn't light it, just held it between 2 fingers, rolling it slowly. "If that comes back on the club, it won't. If it does, if the school finds out, if CPS gets involved, if someone at the county office matches the handwriting, that's not just you, Raina. That's the patch. That's all of us. Every member, every bike in that lot. They'll use it to take the kid and close us down in the same motion." "I know." "Then why didn't you bring it to the table?" Raina's jaw tightened. The fluorescent light buzzed above them, the specific frequency of institutional lighting that turns everything slightly green, slightly ill. Outside, a Harley started up, someone heading into town, the engine coughing once before settling into its idle, the vibration traveling through the diner's floor like a pulse. "Because the table would have said no," she said, "and the table would have been right, and Eli would have been expelled, and I would have watched it happen, knowing I could have stopped it, and I can't do that again." The last 2 words changed the temperature of the room. Again. Devlin's hand stopped rolling the cigarette. He looked at Raina, not at her face, but at her arms, at the scars that ran along the underside of her forearms, parallel and precise, the ones everyone knew about and no one discussed. They weren't self-inflicted. They were surgical. Suture lines from skin grafts performed in the field, repairs to damage taken when a blast concussion sent her through the wall of a field hospital and into a triage area where she continued working with shrapnel in both arms because there were wounded who needed her hands more than her hands needed rest. But the scars were also a map, and Devlin knew enough to read one. "This isn't just about the kid," he said quietly. Raina's eyes went flat. The color drained from them, the way color drains from a sky before a storm. Not gradually, but in a single, silent withdrawal that leaves everything gray. "Don't. There was someone before. In your unit, a kid, someone you couldn't—" "I said don't." Her voice didn't rise, it dropped. Below conversation, below warning, into the register that Devlin recognized from the rare, terrible moments when Raina Cross stopped being the matriarch and became the medic, the woman who had held people together with her hands and watched them come apart anyway. He put the cigarette in his mouth, didn't light it, looked at the floor. "I'll keep it quiet," he said. "But if it blows up, you tell the table it was you, not the club. You." That was always the plan. He nodded once and walked out. The diner door swung shut behind him, and Raina stood alone in the kitchen with the grease congealing on the flat top and the fluorescent light buzzing and the specific weight of a secret that she had chosen to carry because the alternative was letting a boy fall through a crack she'd seen swallow someone else, in another country, in another life, when her hands were faster, but not fast enough. 3 days later, the assessment happened. Dr. Lena Vasic, county psychologist, administered a battery of tests in a small office at the Ridgecrest Community Health Center. Eli sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that reminded him of school, which made his shoulders climb toward his ears in the way they always did when institutional furniture and institutional lighting combined to create the specific atmosphere of being measured. The test took 4 hours. Reading, writing, processing speed, working memory, pattern recognition, visual spatial reasoning. Raina waited in the parking lot. She sat in her truck with the engine off, her breath fogging the windshield, and she didn't move for 4 hours. Not for coffee, not for the bathroom. She sat the way she'd sat during surgeries when she was the one performing them. Still, focused, holding space for an outcome she couldn't control. When Eli came out, he looked like someone who had been wrung out and hung up to dry. His face was pale. His eyes had the specific emptiness that follows sustained cognitive effort in someone whose brain processes language through a filter that the rest of the world doesn't see. "How was it?" Raina asked. Eli got in the truck, closed the door, put his hands in his lap. She said, "I'm not stupid." "You're not." She said, "My brain does something different with letters, like it sees them, but it rearranges them, or drops some out, or adds things that aren't there. She has a word for it. Dyslexia." Eli looked at her. "You already knew." "I suspected. Since the first week." "Then why didn't you say something?" "Because you needed a doctor to tell you, not a mechanic with an opinion. The word matters less than the documentation. With a diagnosis, the school has to accommodate you. Different tests, more time, alternative assignments. It's the law. They can't just—" She stopped. Her hands were on the steering wheel, and she was gripping it the way she gripped things when the thing she really wanted to grip was a situation that kept slipping. They can't just keep feeding you through a machine that was built for a different shape. Eli was quiet for a long time. The truck's heater ticked. Rain had started. Light, cold, the kind that feels like the sky is exhaling. "The form," he said. "The consent form." Raina's hands didn't move on the steering wheel. "My mom didn't sign it." It wasn't a question. Eli's voice was flat, factual, carrying the weight of a conclusion arrived at through the same pattern recognition ability that made him a natural mechanic. He saw the shape of things. The shape of this was clear. His mother hadn't left her room in weeks. The form required a parent signature. The form had been submitted. Therefore, someone else had signed it. Raina started the truck. The engine turned over with a diesel rattle that filled the cab with vibration. She put it in reverse, looked over her shoulder, backed out of the parking space. "Yes," she said. To the rearview mirror, to the rain, to the boy beside her who had just been handed a gift wrapped in a felony. Eli stared through the windshield at the rain. "Could you get in trouble?" "Yes." "How much trouble?" "Enough." "Why did you do it?" Raina pulled onto the county road. The wipers beat a rhythm that sounded like a slow heartbeat, back and forth, clearing water that immediately returned. The road stretched ahead of them, gray and empty, the fields on either side brown with winter dormancy, the fence posts leaning in the wind like old men who'd stopped caring about posture. "Because I've been in rooms where I had the tools to save someone and didn't use them," she said. "And I've been in rooms where I didn't have the tools and couldn't save anyone no matter what I did. The first one is worse. The first one follows you home." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The statement sat in the truck's cab like a third passenger, silent, heavy, breathing its own air. They drove the rest of the way to the compound without speaking. The diagnosis changed things, but not the way anyone expected. Dr. Vasik's report arrived at the school 4 days later. It was thorough, clinical, and unambiguous. Eli Mercer presented with moderate to severe dyslexia, above-average visual spatial intelligence, and exceptional mechanical reasoning ability. The report recommended a full individualized education program, extended testing time, alternative assignment formats, and access to audio-based learning materials. Principal Hale received the report, read it, and called Raina. "Ms. Cross, I have Dr. Vasik's assessment, and I have a question." Raina was in the diner kitchen, phone pressed between her ear and shoulder, both hands elbow-deep in bread dough. "Ask it." The consent form was signed by Darla Mercer. "That's correct?" "I've spoken with Darla Mercer's neighbors. Several of them indicate that Mrs. Mercer has not been seen outside her home in over a month. One neighbor reports that the only person entering or leaving the residence is Eli himself. Raina's hands stopped in the dough. The kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of rain on the corrugated roof. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her, the slow seismic movement of a situation that was about to crack open. Mrs. Hale, I haven't finished. I'm required by law to report suspected child neglect when evidence suggests a minor is living without adequate parental supervision. The picture I'm looking at, chronic absenteeism, a parent who cannot or will not engage with the school, a child who is being housed and fed by an unrelated adult organization. This picture triggers mandatory reporting obligations. The bread dough squeezed between Raina's fingers, cold, dense, the texture of something that needed more time to rise but wasn't going to get it. If I report, Child Protective Services opens an investigation. If CPS finds what I think they'll find, an incapacitated parent, an unsupervised minor, an unregulated living arrangement, Eli enters the foster system. The probation becomes irrelevant. The diagnosis becomes someone else's file. And the question of who signed that consent form becomes a matter for law enforcement rather than education. Raina closed her eyes. The rain intensified on the roof. Inside the clubhouse, someone dropped something heavy. A toolbox, maybe, or a chair. And the crash traveled through the walls like a gunshot in a place where everyone had been shot at. What are you telling me, Mrs. Hale? A pause. Long. The kind of pause that exists between two people who are each holding a piece of a situation that could destroy someone they've both decided, against their better judgment, to protect. I'm telling you that I have 30 days before the end of the probationary period. And I'm telling you that my mandatory reporting obligation is triggered by evidence, not by suspicion. And I'm telling you that the evidence I currently have is incomplete. Another pause. I'm also telling you that in 30 days, if I don't see a stable living situation for that boy, a real one, with documentation, with legal standing, I won't have a choice anymore. The law doesn't care about motorcycles or good intentions. The line went dead. Raina stood in the kitchen with dough on her hands and rain on the roof, and the full weight of what had just happened settling into her body like cold water filling a basement. Hale knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the forged signature specifically, but enough. Enough to end it. And she was choosing not to. For now. For 30 days. After that, the institutional machinery would engage, and once it engaged, there was no disengaging it. CPS, courts, foster care. The same system that had failed Eli in every conceivable way would now claim jurisdiction over his body because it had finally noticed what the Iron Saints had been trying to fix for 2 months. She washed her hands, dried them on her apron, walked to the clubhouse. Truax was at the main table, going over supply invoices. Devlin was on the couch, Boots on the coffee table, reading a motorcycle magazine without actually reading it. 3 other members. Sykes, the man with the prosthetic leg. Merritt, the wiry mechanic with the reading glasses, and a younger member named Cole, full-sleeve tattoos and a face that hadn't yet learned to hide what it was thinking, sat at various points around the room. Church, Raina said. The word changed the room. Church, the term the club used for an emergency meeting of patched members. It carried weight that regular conversation didn't. Devlin's boots came off the table. Truax set down his pen. Cole straightened in his chair. Now? Truax asked. Now. Within 10 minutes, every patched member was at the table. 11 chairs. 11 vests. The room smelled like coffee and leather and the rain that clung to everyone who'd crossed the gravel lot to get there. The overhead light, a single bulb in a metal shade, cast a circle of amber that ended at the edges of the table, leaving the walls in shadow. Raina stood at the head. She didn't sit. She told them everything. The forged signature. The diagnosis. Hale's call. The 30-day window. The CPS threat. She laid it out the way she'd once laid out casualty reports. Clearly, completely, without softening the numbers. When she was done, the silence was so thick that the rain on the roof sounded like applause from a distant crowd watching a disaster. Cole spoke first. You forged a legal document. Yes. Without bringing it to the table. Yes. And now the school knows, and CPS is 30 days from taking the kid, and the entire club is exposed because I decided to give a child access to a medical diagnosis that his own mother is too broken to authorize. Yes, I did that, and I do it again. Cole's jaw worked. He was 27, patched in 2 years ago. He had the specific energy of a man who believed in rules because rules were the only thing standing between the club and the chaos that had defined everything before it. He wasn't wrong. That was the problem. The people who insist on process are rarely wrong. They're just never the ones holding the dying. "What's the play?" Truax said. His voice cut through the tension like a blade through a knot. Not violently, but decisively, redirecting the energy from blame to trajectory. Raina looked at him. Legal guardianship. The table went quiet in a new way. Not the quiet of shock, the quiet of people running calculations. Legal guardianship. The words were simple. The implications were not. A motorcycle club matriarch petitioning a county court for legal guardianship of a 13-year-old boy. The paperwork. The background checks. The home study. The scrutiny of every aspect of the compound, the club's finances, the members' records. Some of those records were clean, some were not. Truax had a DUI from 2014. Devlin had an assault charge from the Tulsa incident that was reduced to a misdemeanor but never expunged. Sykes had a dishonorable discharge that he'd spent 15 years trying to have reclassified. "They'll look at everything," Devlin said. "The club, the compound, every one of us." "I know. And if they'll find a group of veterans and working men who maintain a legal motorcycle club, operate a licensed food establishment, and have been providing structure, mentorship, and supervision to a minor in crisis for the past 7 weeks. That's what they'll find because that's what we are." "That's what we are today," Cole said. "What about what some of us were before?" The question hung. Raina looked around the table, face by face, scar by scar, the accumulated damage of men who had survived things that should have killed them and found each other in the aftermath. Every one of them carried something that could be weaponized by a system looking for reasons to say no. A bad year, a bad night. A bad decision made in the specific darkness that follows a war or a divorce or a funeral or the moment you realize the country you almost died for doesn't recognize you in the grocery store checkout line. "We file the petition," Raina said. "We cooperate with the home study. We open the compound to whatever inspection they require. And we show them what Eli's life looks like here versus what it looks like without us. That's the argument. That's the only argument that matters." "And the forged consent?" Devlin said. Quiet. Direct. The question no one else would ask. "If it comes up, it's mine. Not the club's. Mine. I'll take whatever consequence follows." "That could mean jail time, Raina." "I know what it could mean." Boone hadn't spoken. He sat at the far end of the table, his hands flat on the wood, the tremor visible in both now. A bad day. The kind where the ghosts in his nervous system decided to make themselves known. He'd been listening with the specific attention of a man who processes information the way he processes engines, methodically, completely, in silence, and who speaks only when the diagnosis is ready. "Where's the boy now?" he asked. "School." "Does he know about any of this?" "No." "When are you going to tell him?" Raina looked at Boone. Of everyone at the table, he was the one whose investment in Eli was most visible and most vulnerable. The garage lessons, the reading sessions, the patient, relentless campaign to dismantle a wall that shame and neglect had built around a child's mind. If the guardianship petition failed, if CPS took Eli, Boone wouldn't lose a project. He'd lose the first thing he'd cared about since the valley, since the vehicle, since the child in the road and the 2/5 of a second that divided his life into before and after. "Tonight," she said. "After dinner. I'll tell him tonight." "I'll be there," Boone said. "Boone, I said I'll be there." His voice was low but carried a weight that closed the conversation like a door closing on a room that everyone needed to leave. Truax looked around the table. "Vote," he said. The petition for guardianship, the club's support, all in. 11 hands, some fast, some slow, some with tremors and some with scars, and one with a prosthetic thumb that Sykes had built himself from a titanium rod and a motorcycle throttle spring. 11 hands, raised, unanimous. The rain didn't stop all day. At 6:15, Eli came through the compound gate with his backpack over one shoulder and his sneakers soaked through. He'd walked from the bus stop, half a mile in the downpour, and his hoodie was dark with water, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face carrying the specific grayness of a day spent fighting words that fought back. He went to the diner first. Habit. The warmth hit him as he opened the door. The blast of heated air mixed with the smell of whatever Raina had been cooking. Tonight it was chilly. The slow simmered kind that had been on the stove since morning and had turned the windows opaque with condensation. He dropped his backpack by the door, sat at the counter, pulled a vocabulary worksheet from his bag and stared at it. Raina set a bowl of chili in front of him, cornbread on a separate plate, a glass of water. "Eat first," she said. He ate, slowly. The chili was hot and thick and sat in his stomach like a warm hand pressing against the hollow place. The cornbread was dense, slightly sweet, with crisp edges that crumbled when he bit into them. He ate everything, drank the water, sat with his hands around the empty bowl, absorbing the residual heat through the ceramic. Boone came in through the side door, rain on his shoulders. He didn't get food. He sat 2 stools down from Eli and folded his hands on the counter. His tremor was audible, a faint tapping of knuckle on formica, rhythmic, involuntary, the percussion section of a war that played on repeat in his nervous system. Eli looked at them. Raina behind the counter, Boone beside him, the diner empty except for the 3 of them, the rain outside and the warmth inside and the specific quality of silence that means something is about to be said that can't be unsaid. "What happened?" Eli said. Not a question. A reading of the room. Raina set down the towel she'd been holding. She planted both hands on the counter and leaned forward and told the boy everything. The 30-day window, the CPS threat, the guardianship petition, the fact that his living situation, the compound, the diner, the garage, the brotherhood that had become his foundation, was about to be scrutinized by a system that had the power to remove him from it. She told him clearly, completely, without softening, because Eli Mercer had been softened to enough, by neglect, by omission, by the careful, devastating kindness of adults who protected children from the truth and then wondered why the children didn't trust them. She told him almost everything. She didn't tell him about the forged signature. Eli listened without moving. His hand stayed on the empty bowl. His eyes stayed on the counter. When Raina finished, the rain had intensified outside, drumming on the roof with a force that made the windows rattle in their frames. "So they could take me," he said. "They could try. And put me somewhere. A foster placement. Yes. And I wouldn't come here anymore." Raina's throat moved, a swallow that she tried to make invisible and couldn't. "That's what we're trying to prevent." Eli lifted his hands from the bowl, set them flat on the counter. His fingers were still pink from the cold walk, the nails bitten to the quick, the knuckles rough from degreaser and gravel, and the specific abrasion of a life lived mostly with his hands. He looked at Boone. "Did you know?" "I found out an hour ago." "And the others, the club?" "Everyone knows. Everyone voted. Unanimous support for the petition." "What does that mean?" "Unanimous. It means every single person in this compound raised their hand and said you're worth fighting for." Eli's face did something that had no name. Not a cry, not a collapse. A rearrangement. The features shifting as if the muscles beneath them were trying to accommodate an emotion that had never been stored there before. An emotion so unfamiliar that the architecture of his expression didn't have a room for it. He looked down at the counter. His jaw clenched. His nostrils flared once. Then the surface resealed, smooth and hard, the way a frozen lake reseals over a crack, quickly, before anyone can see what's underneath. 29 days, he said. 29 days, Raina confirmed. Then I need to be better, at school, at everything. If they're going to look at me, at all of this, I need to be better than I've ever been. You need to be exactly what you are, Boone said. Not better. Not performing. What you are. Because what you are is enough. It's always been enough. The problem was never you. The problem was everyone who looked at you and measured the wrong thing. Eli stared at him. The rain hammered the roof. The chili pot bubbled softly on the stove. Somewhere in the compound, a door slammed. Wind or carelessness or the specific violence of a day that had exhausted everyone's patience for gentleness. "What if it's not enough?" the boy whispered. Neither Raina nor Boone answered. Because the honest answer, the one that lived behind their eyes and in the scars on their arms and in the tremor that wouldn't stop, was that sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you do everything right and the system still wins. Sometimes you show up every day and the machine still grinds. Sometimes the hands are fast enough and the wound still bleeds out. But you show up anyway. That's the only part you control. Eli picked up his vocabulary worksheet, smoothed it flat on the counter. The words swam and rearranged and fought him the way they always did. He picked up a pencil. His hand was steady. He started with the first word. Outside, the rain fell on the compound, on the corrugated roof, on the gravel lot, on the line of Harleys parked beneath a canvas awning that snapped in the wind like something trying to break free. The water ran in channels through the gravel, pooling around tire tracks and boot prints, erasing them as quickly as they were made. And in the diner, under fluorescent light, a boy who couldn't read sat between a woman who had forged his future and a man who was still trying to forgive his past. And he wrote a word on a piece of paper, letter by letter, the pencil pressing hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath. The word was synchronization. He spelled it correctly. And 29 days began counting down like the ticking of an engine that everyone in the compound could hear, but no one could stop. Day 41. 19 days left. And the compound woke to the sound of a car that didn't belong. Eli heard it first. He was in the kitchen at 5:15, cracking eggs into a stainless steel bowl the way Raina had taught him. One-handed, decisive, the shells splitting clean along a single fracture line, when the crunch of tires on gravel broke the pre-dawn silence. Not a Harley, not a truck, something lighter, official, the specific sound of a sedan navigating a surface it wasn't designed for. He set down the egg and looked through the kitchen window. A white Chevrolet Malibu with a Ridgecrest County seal on the door panel sat in the gravel lot, engine still running, headlights cutting through the dark. A woman got out, mid-40s, brown coat, clipboard. The clipboard was the detail that mattered, the universal signifier of someone who had come to measure, to evaluate, to assign a number to something that couldn't be numbered. Raina appeared behind Eli. She'd been in the storage room and she moved to the window without a sound, the way she moved through everything, economically, without wasted motion, her body still operating on the field hospital protocols that had been written into her muscles 20 years ago. CPS, she said. Eli's hand tightened on the countertop. I thought we had 19 days. We have 19 days on the school probation. CPS operates on its own timeline. What do we do? Raina untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter with a precision that was either discipline or an attempt to control the one thing she could while the rest unraveled. We open the door, she said, and we tell the truth. The woman's name was Sandra Fitch. She introduced herself at the compound entrance with the practiced warmth of someone who delivered uncertainty for a living, not cold, not insincere, but calibrated. The way a surgeon's hands are calibrated. Gentle because precision demands it, not because the situation does. Ms. Cross, I'm with the Ridgecrest County Department of Children and Family Services. We've received a referral regarding the welfare of a minor identified as Eli Mercer. I'd like to discuss the circumstances of his current living arrangement. Raina stepped aside and let her in. The next 3 hours were an autopsy of everything the Iron Saints had built. Fitch toured the compound, the diner. She noted the commercial kitchen license on the wall, the clean food storage, the organized walk-in cooler. The garage. She noted the tools, the workspace, the fact that a miner had been working with industrial equipment. Her pen moved across the clipboard in quick, small strokes, each notation a brick being laid in a structure that could become either a foundation or a wall. She spoke with Truax, with Devlin, with Sykes, who removed his prosthetic leg and showed her how it worked with the specific pride of a man who had rebuilt himself from salvage parts and wanted the record to reflect it. She spoke with Boone, who answered her questions about the reading lessons in sentences so short they sounded like code. Each word chosen, weighed, deployed with the economy of a man who understood that language, once released, cannot be recalled. "And the boy sleeps where?" Fitch asked. "He sleeps at home," Raina said, "with his mother." "Every night?" "Every night." "And during the day?" "He's at school until 3:15, then he comes here. Homework, dinner, mentorship. He walks home or someone drives him by 7:30. Fitch wrote something on her clipboard. The pen paused. She looked up. "Ms. Cross, I'll be direct. The referral indicates concerns about parental capacity. I'll need to conduct a home visit with Mrs. Mercer. If I find that the home environment is unable to support the minor's basic needs, my obligations become very specific." Raina's face didn't change, but her hands, hidden behind the counter where Fitch couldn't see them, closed into fists so tight that the knuckles went white, then red, then a color that existed only in the space between control and catastrophe. "I understand," Raina said. Fitch left at 8:40. Her sedan crunched back over the gravel, and the sound of it disappearing down the county road left a vacuum that the compound filled with the kind of silence that exists inside a detonator between the trigger and the blast. Boone found Raina in the garage. She was standing at his workbench, both hands planted on the surface, her head bowed, her breathing audible, not ragged but deep, controlled, the breathing of a woman who had once kept herself conscious through blood loss by counting her own heartbeats. "She's going to the house," Boone said. "Yes, and Darla's not—" "No, Darla is not going to pass a home visit. Darla is not going to open the door. Darla is existing behind a locked bedroom door in a house with an empty refrigerator and unpaid utilities, and a television that runs 24 hours a day because the sound is the only thing keeping her tethered to the concept of being alive. That is what Sandra Fitch is going to find." Boone leaned against the garage wall. The morning light came through the bay door in a flat gray sheet that made everything look like a photograph with the color drained out. His tremor was present, both hands now, the left worse than the right, the involuntary testimony of a nervous system that had never fully stood down from a war zone that existed only in his body's memory. "Then we need to get to Darla first," he said. Raina lifted her head, looked at him. The expression on her face was one he'd never seen. Not the triage face, not the command face, but something underneath both of them. Something exhausted and raw and close to the surface in a way that Raina Cross never allowed anything to be close to the surface. "I've tried. 4 times. She doesn't answer the door. She doesn't answer the phone. She exists in that room the way—" She stopped, swallowed. "The way wounded exist in the first 48 hours, when the body hasn't decided yet, whether to repair or to shut down." "Then we don't knock." Raina's eyes narrowed. "Meaning what?" "Meaning Eli has a key. Meaning we go in. Meaning we clean the house, stock the refrigerator, pay whatever's past due on the utilities, and make that home look like a home visit can survive it. And then we sit with Darla Mercer, and we tell her that her son is about to be taken from her, and we find out whether that information reaches whatever part of her is still functioning. And if it doesn't reach, then we've done what we can, and the petition has to carry the rest." Raina stared at him. The garage smelled like motor oil and cold metal and the ghost of every cigarette that had ever been smoked inside its walls. A Harley engine ticked somewhere behind them, cooling, settling, the mechanical equivalent of a sigh. "Truax and Devlin," she said. "No one else. Small, quiet. We go tonight." They went at 7. Eli was at the compound, in the diner with Merritt, working through a reading exercise. Raina told him she had errands. He didn't question it. The boy had learned to read rooms long before he learned to read words, and the room tonight said, "Don't ask." Truax drove his truck. Raina sat passenger. Boone and Devlin followed in Boone's pickup. No bikes. Bikes announced. Trucks arrived. The Mercer house sat at the end of Phelan Street, a dead-end road where the streetlights had been out for months, and the county hadn't replaced them because Phelan Street was the kind of address that counties forget on purpose. The house was a single-story ranch with vinyl siding that had gone from white to the color of old teeth. The lawn was dead, not dormant, dead, and the mailbox leaned at an angle that suggested someone had hit it with a car and no one had bothered to straighten it. Raina had the key. Eli kept a spare at the compound, on a hook in the garage, next to his work gloves. She'd taken it without telling him. The front door stuck. Truax put his shoulder into it. Gently, the controlled force of a man who understood the difference between opening a door and breaking it. And it gave with a sound like old wood separating from old paint. The smell hit them first. Not filth, not garbage. Something worse. The smell of stagnation. Of air that hadn't moved in weeks. Of dishes in a sink that had been rinsed but not washed. Of carpet that had absorbed months of stillness. Of a house that was technically occupied but functionally abandoned. It was the smell of depression. Not the word, not the diagnosis, but the physical reality of it. The way it settles into walls and fabrics and the spaces between things. The way it becomes atmospheric. Devlin's jaw tightened. He'd grown up in a house that smelled like this. Different circumstances, same architecture of neglect. He reached for the light switch. The light didn't come on. "Power's out," Truax said. "No." Raina pointed at the television glow leaking from beneath the bedroom door at the end of the hall. "Power's on. The bulb's dead. He's been living in a house with dead bulbs because replacing them requires a ladder, and he's 13 and there's no one else." They worked in the dark, using flashlights. Truax took the kitchen, emptied the refrigerator of everything expired, scrubbed the counters, ran the dishes through water heated on the stove because the water heater was set so low it barely produced warmth. Devlin took the living room, vacuumed with a machine that sounded like it was dying and might have been, straightened the furniture, collected the mail from every surface where it had accumulated. Boone found replacement bulbs in a closet and worked through the house, room by room, screwing light into fixtures that had been dark for weeks. Raina went to the bedroom door. She stood in front of it for 30 seconds. The television murmured behind it, a talk show, voices that sounded enthusiastic about things that didn't matter. The specific noise of entertainment designed to fill silence without requiring presence. Beneath the talk show, she could hear breathing, slow, rhythmic, the metronome of survival stripped to its most basic function. She knocked. Not hard. The knock of a medic arriving at a bedside, not a soldier arriving at a position. "Darla, my name is Raina Cross. Your son works at my compound. I need to speak with you." Nothing. "Darla, I'm going to open this door, not to force anything, not to judge anything. I need to talk to you about Eli. He needs you right now, more than he's ever needed you." The television volume dropped. Not off, down. The same response Eli had described, the only language Darla Mercer still spoke. Raina opened the door. The room was small. A queen bed pushed against the far wall, the sheets tangled, the comforter half on the floor. A dresser with a mirror that reflected the television's blue light back into the room in fractured patterns. Clothes that's not scattered but piled, neatly, on a chair. The organized chaos of a person who still folded things but couldn't put them away. Pill bottles on the nightstand. Not many. 3, 4, the labels facing away. A glass of water, half full, with a skin of dust on its surface that said it had been sitting there for days. Darla Mercer lay on her side, facing the television. She was thinner than the photographs Raina had seen. Thinner in the way that happens when eating becomes a negotiation with a body that has lost interest in its own continuation. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back with an elastic. Her eyes were open. They moved to Raina and stayed there, but the look in them was not recognition. It was registration. The minimum cognitive response to a new stimulus in an environment that had been stimulus-free for weeks. Raina pulled the chair to the bedside, sat down, didn't touch Darla, didn't crowd her, positioned herself at a distance that said, "I am here, but I am not a threat." The same distance she'd maintained 100 times in 100 triage tents with 100 patients whose first instinct was to flinch. "Darla, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it even if you can't respond right now. Can you do that?" Darla's eyes stayed on her. No blink, no nod. But no withdrawal either. She was listening the way a person underwater listens, Everything muffled, everything distant, but audible. A woman from Child Protective Services visited my compound this morning. She's going to visit this house. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. When she comes, she's going to evaluate whether this is a safe environment for your son. If she determines it isn't, she has the authority to remove Eli from your custody and place him in foster care. Darla's breathing changed. One beat, faster. Then the rhythm reasserted itself, the body's regulators pulling the system back to baseline, the way a thermostat corrects for a draft. But the change had happened. Raina saw it. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to fix you. I can't do that. No one can do that except you, and only when you're ready. But I need you to know what's at stake. Your son, your boy, has been getting up before dawn for 2 months, walking 3 miles in the dark, working, learning, fighting every single day against a system that told him he was broken and against a brain that makes words move on the page. He has done all of this without you, not because he's angry, because he loves you enough to carry this alone so you don't have to see it. Darla's eyes closed. A tear appeared at the corner of her left eye. It didn't fall. It sat there, held by surface tension and gravity and the specific physics of grief that has been compressed into a space too small to contain it. But he can't carry it alone anymore, Darla. He needs one thing from you, one thing. He needs you to be present. Even if it's just in this room, even if it's just for the 45 minutes that Sandra Fitch is in this house. He needs you to be here. Not fixed, not perfect. Here, can you do that? The tear fell. It traveled the contour of Darla's cheekbone, following the geography of a face that had once been animated by all the things faces are animated by. Laughter, exasperation, the particular exhaustion of mothering a child who saw the world differently. And that was now terrain that grief had flattened into something featureless. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The voice that came out was barely a voice. It was the ghost of a voice, thin and frayed like fabric that had been washed too many times. I can't, she said, and stopped. The words hit a wall inside her chest and broke apart. You can't what? I can't be what he needs. Raina leaned forward, not physically, emotionally. The distance between them compressed without either body moving, the way distance compresses in a confessional or a foxhole. The spaces where honesty becomes compulsory because everything else has been stripped away. He doesn't need you to be anything except alive and in the room. That's it. That's the whole job right now. Be alive. Be in the room. Let the woman from CPS see that this house has a mother in it. Everything else, the food, the bills, the school, the future, we're handling. But this one thing, Darla, this one thing only you can do. Darla's hand moved on the sheet, a small motion. Fingers extending, then curling, like a plant that reaches toward light and then remembers it's dark. He's so smart, she whispered. Everyone thinks but he's so smart. I know. His father said he was stupid the night he left. He said, in front of Eli, he said the boy was stupid and he was tired of pretending otherwise. Darla's voice cracked on the last word, and something came through the crack. Not tears, but the sound that precedes tears, the structural failure that happens when a wall that's been holding back a reservoir develops its first fracture. Eli heard him, standing in the hallway, in his pajamas, 11 years old. And I just stood there. I just stood there and let him hear it. Raina reached out and placed her hand on Darla's arm. The touch was light, clinical, the pressure of fingertips checking for a pulse, for warmth, for the basic indicators of a system that was still running. That was then, Raina said. This is now. And right now, your son is at my compound reading a vocabulary worksheet that would make a high school student sweat. And he's doing it because a man who can barely hold a wrench some days sits next to him every night and tells him to try the next word. He is not stupid. He has never been stupid. And the man who said that is gone, and the words he left behind are not true, and you, Darla, you are still here, which means you get to rewrite them, but only if you get out of this bed. The room was silent, except for the television and the wind outside and the sound of Truax in the kitchen, running water, the pipes groaning as they adjusted to sudden use after weeks of dormancy. The house was waking up around Darla Mercer the way a body wakes up after surgery, slowly, painfully, with the awareness that something has been cut open and rearranged. Darla's hand uncurled. It moved across the sheet, 3 inches, 4, and settled on Raina's wrist. The grip was weak, barely there. The grip of a person who is reaching for something they're not sure is real. "Okay," she whispered. One word, barely audible. The smallest unit of commitment possible. But Raina Cross had built an entire career on small units. The faintest pulse, the shallowest breath, the tiniest sign that a system was fighting its way back to function rather than surrendering to shutdown. "Okay," Raina repeated, and she stayed in that room, her hand on Darla's arm, until the first light of dawn came through the window and painted the walls with a pale gold that looked, for the first time in months, like something other than indifference. They worked through the night. By morning, the house was clean. Not immaculate, lived in, credible. The house of a family managing hardship, not a family drowning in it. The refrigerator held groceries. Truax had driven to the all-night market in Bakerville and filled 3 bags with basics. The utilities were current. Devlin had made calls, paid balances, convinced a supervisor at the electric company that the account was being rehabilitated. The light bulbs worked. The floors were swept. The bathroom was scrubbed. And Darla Mercer was sitting up in bed, showered. Raina had helped her, the 2 women moving through the process with the clinical intimacy of a nurse and a patient. Wearing clean clothes, her hair brushed, a cup of tea on the nightstand where the dusty water glass had been. She looked fragile. She looked like a woman made of paper who might tear if the wind changed direction. But she was upright. And her eyes, when they moved, tracked with something that hadn't been there 12 hours ago. Presence. Faint, flickering, unreliable, but present. They left at 6. Raina last. She stood in the doorway of Darla's room and looked at the woman in the bed and felt the specific terror of a medic who has stabilized a patient and must now leave the patient alone with the wound. "Sandra Fitch will come today or tomorrow. Answer the door. Let her in. You don't have to perform. You just have to be here." Darla nodded. The nod was small, but it existed. Raina drove back to the compound in the gray light. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. Not from the tremor that Boone carried, but from the specific exhaustion of a woman who had been awake for 26 hours performing a different kind of surgery, the kind that operates on a house and a family and a chain of failures using cleaning supplies and groceries, and a voice that refuses to soften into pity because pity is the anesthetic that makes people stop fighting. She pulled through the gate at 6:20. Eli was already there, standing at the diner entrance, backpack on his shoulder, a vocabulary worksheet in his hand. He looked at her truck, looked at the mud on the tires, looked at her face, the creased eyes, the flat mouth, the specific architecture of someone who has spent the night building something and isn't sure it will hold. "You went to my house," he said. Raina turned off the engine, sat in the cab for a moment. The steering wheel was still warm under her fingers. "Yes." "Is she?" "She's awake. She's sitting up. She drank tea." Eli's mouth pressed into a line. The information landed on him like weight being added to a structure that was already at capacity. Not breaking it, but testing it, finding the exact point where resilience and collapse share a border. "Did she say anything?" "She said you're smart." The boy blinked, once, twice. His eyes went bright, not with tears, but with the specific shine that occurs when something inside a person fractures in a direction they didn't expect. Not downward, lateral, the crack that lets light in instead of letting structure out. He turned toward the diner, stopped, turned back. "Raina." "What?" "Thank you." She looked at him. 13 years old, standing in gravel in shoes that Devlin had bought him because the duct tape pair had finally disintegrated, holding a vocabulary worksheet that contained words he couldn't have identified 8 weeks ago. Carrying a weight that no child should carry, and carrying it with a posture that was no longer braced for impact, but leaned slightly forward, into the wind, into whatever was coming, the posture of someone who has decided that moving forward is the only direction that doesn't lead backward. "Don't thank me," she said. "Pass the vocabulary test." He almost smiled. The expression made it halfway before the muscles caught themselves. Old habit, old armor. But the attempt itself was evidence of something. A thaw. Structural. Slow. The kind that happens in ground that has been frozen so long it doesn't remember being soft. He walked into the diner. Raina sat in the truck for another 2 minutes. Then she got out, crossed the gravel, and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. Sandra Fitch visited the Mercer house at 2:15 that afternoon. Darla opened the door. The visit lasted 40 minutes. Raina wasn't there. She couldn't be. Presence would imply staging. But Devlin sat in his truck 2 blocks away, engine off, window cracked, smoking a cigarette with the specific patience of a man who had learned to wait in places where waiting was the only weapon available. At 3 o'clock, the white Malibu pulled out of the Mercier driveway. Devlin watched it turn onto the county road and disappear. His phone rang. Raina. She left, he said. How long? 40 minutes. Did she take Eli? The kid's at school. She visited the house, just Darla. A pause. Devlin could hear Raina breathing on the other end, the breathing of a woman counting down from a number that kept resetting. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They both hung up. And the silence that followed was the silence of people who have thrown everything they have at a situation and are now waiting to find out if everything was enough. 4 days later, the letter arrived. Not at the compound, at the county courthouse. Raina's attorney, a woman named Petra Solano, who had done pro bono work for veterans organizations and who had agreed to handle the guardianship petition at a rate that Raina could barely afford and had not told the club she was paying, called at 9 in the morning. The home study report is in, Petra said. Fitch's recommendation. Raina gripped the phone. And? She's recommending supervised family preservation services, not removal. She found the home marginal but stable. She noted the mother's condition, but also noted evidence of recent improvement and active community support. She's recommending the guardianship petition proceed to hearing. Raina sat down. The chair creaked. The kitchen was empty. The flat-top grill was cold. Outside, the Harleys were silent. Too early for engines, too early for the compound to be fully awake. It was just her and the phone and the information that the first wall had not collapsed. When's the hearing? 2 weeks, the 14th. That's the same day as his school probation review. I know. The judge will want to see school performance as part of the guardianship evaluation. If the school signs off on his progress, it strengthens the petition. If they don't, they will. Raina, they will. Because he's earned it. Every word, every test, every day. He's earned it. Petra paused. The pause of a lawyer who has learned that conviction and evidence are not the same thing. I'll send you the hearing details. Get the boy ready. Get the club ready. And Raina, the judge will ask about the consent form, the one for the disability assessment. Be prepared for that question. The line went dead. Raina set the phone on the counter, stared at it. The device sat there, small, black, inert, holding the future in its circuits the way a grenade holds its blast. 2 weeks, 14 days. The school review and the guardianship hearing on the same day, the same hinge, every thread of the last 2 months converging on a single point that would either hold or snap. And somewhere in that convergence, the forged signature sat like a crack in a foundation, invisible from above, structural from below, waiting for the right pressure to split everything open. Raina stood up, tied her apron, turned on the flat-top grill. 14 days. She started cracking eggs. The morning of the 14th arrived the way all mornings of consequence arrive. Ordinary. Ordinary light. Ordinary cold. The same dawn breaking over the same compound, the same corrugated fence catching the same pale suggestion of a sun that hadn't committed to showing itself. Eli stood in the diner kitchen at 5 a.m. and cracked 12 eggs into a bowl without breaking a single yolk, and the precision of it, the control, the muscle memory, was the only thing keeping his hands from shaking. Raina was already dressed, not in her apron, not in the thermal shirt and jeans that constituted her daily uniform. She wore a dark blazer over a collared shirt, her leather vest folded over the back of a chair. The blazer looked borrowed, and it was Petra Solano had dropped it off the night before along with a file folder containing every document, every assessment, every record of attendance and progress that the last 60 days had produced. The blazer didn't fit right. It was too broad in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves, and Raina wore it the way she wore everything that wasn't leather, with visible discomfort and the determination to endure it. Boone came through the side door at 5:15. He'd shaved. Eli noticed it before he noticed anything else. The jaw that was usually obscured by 3 days of growth was exposed, the scar tissue along the left side visible in the kitchen light, the skin raw and pink in the way that skin gets when a razor moves over terrain it doesn't visit often. He wore a button-down shirt tucked into clean jeans, and his boots were polished, and the overall effect was of a man who had assembled himself for inspection the way he assembled an engine. Carefully, methodically, with attention to the parts that other people would evaluate. His hands were trembling, both of them. The bad day had arrived on schedule, as if his nervous system understood the stakes and had decided to testify. "You shaved," Eli said. "Don't make it a thing." "You look different." "I look the same, just less hairy." Eli almost smiled. The expression traveled halfway across his face and stopped, held back by the gravity of what was coming. He set the eggs aside and wiped his hands on a towel and stood in the kitchen looking at the two people who had rebuilt his life from the ground up, and he felt the specific vertigo of standing at the edge of something that could go either way. "What if they say no?" he said. Raina picked up the file folder from the counter, checked the contents for the 4th time. "Then we appeal." "And if the appeal, Eli." She closed the folder, looked at him. "One thing at a time. First the school, then the courthouse. One room at a time, one answer at a time." Boone poured coffee into 3 cups. Handed one to Eli. The boy drank it black now. Had for weeks. Another small transformation that no one had commented on because the Iron Saints didn't comment on growth. They simply made room for it. The 3 of them stood in the kitchen and drank coffee and listened to the compound wake up around them. The cough of a generator, the scrape of boots on gravel, the distant sound of Truax's Road King starting up, the engine turning over with the deep chest-vibrating authority of a machine that had been maintained by hands that cared about it. By 7 o'clock, 11 motorcycles idled in the gravel lot. The formation was the same as the first time. The morning they'd ridden to the school 60 days ago, when Eli sat on a plastic chair and waited for no one. The same bikes, the same riders, the same leather vests with the Iron Cross insignia catching the winter light. But something was different. The energy. The first ride had been urgent. A scramble, a rescue mission, a brotherhood mobilizing against a clock. This ride was deliberate, ceremonial. The Iron Saints were not rushing to save a boy. They were riding to stand behind him. Eli rode with Raina again. The same position, behind her on the Heritage Softail, helmet strapped, arms around her waist. But his grip was different, lighter. Not the desperate clutch of a child holding on because he's afraid of falling, but the steady hold of someone who trusts the road and the rider and the machine beneath them. The school first. They arrived at 8:30. The parking lot was half full. Teachers' cars, a few early buses, the maintenance truck that was always parked at the same angle near the gymnasium doors. The 11 Harleys lined up along the east edge of the lot, engines cutting one by one, and the silence that followed was enormous and specific. The silence of a statement being made without words. Eli walked in alone. This was Raina's decision, not the club's entrance. His. The boy would walk into Principal Hale's office under his own power, carrying his own record, standing on his own legs. The brotherhood would be outside, visible through every window, present in the rumble that still vibrated in the building's bones. But inside the office, it would be Eli, and Raina, and Boone. But behind him, not in front. Hale was waiting. The same office, the same desk, the same dying rubber plant that had, against all odds, produced a single new leaf in the weeks since Eli's last visit, small, pale green, curling upward from a stem that everyone had assumed was dead. Hale noticed it the morning it appeared and left it alone, because sometimes the best thing you can do for something trying to grow is to stop evaluating it and let it reach. The file was open on the desk, not the old file, the thick one, the prosecution file, the documentation of every failure. A new one, thinner, clean. "Sit down," Hale said. Her voice was different than the first hearing. Not softer, it was never going to be soft, but less compressed. The voice of a woman who had made a bet against her own protocols and was about to find out if it paid. Eli sat. Raina and Boone took the chairs behind him. The configuration was intentional. The boy in front, the adults at his back, the physical architecture of support without substitution. Hale opened the file. 60 days ago, I gave you a probationary period with 3 conditions: full attendance, completed assignments, measurable progress. She looked at him over her glasses. I'll go through them one at a time. She turned a page. Attendance. In the past 60 days, you have missed 0 school days, 0. In the 60 days before that, you missed 47. She turned another page. Assignments. Completion rate has gone from 17% to 89%. Your teachers note that assignment quality varies, but effort is consistent. She turned a third page. Progress. Your reading level, as assessed 2 weeks ago by Mrs. Kendall, using the accommodations recommended by Dr. Vasik's evaluation, has moved from a 2nd grade equivalent to a 4th grade equivalent in 60 days. That is not normal progress, Eli. That is exceptional progress. The boy's hands were in his lap, his fingers interlaced, the knuckles white, the tendons standing out like cables under tension. He stared at the desk and breathed and waited. I want to be clear about something, Hale said. She closed the file, placed both hands flat on the desk. When you sat in this chair 60 days ago, I had already written the expulsion order. It was on my desk. Signed. Dated. I was going to hand it to your mother, Mum, or to whoever showed up. And I was going to close your file and move on. Because that's what this system does. It processes. It resolves. It moves cases off desks and onto shelves and calls it education. She paused, removed her glasses, set them on the closed file. I was wrong. The system I work in was wrong about you. Your teachers, myself included, measured you against a standard that was never designed for the way your brain works. And when you didn't meet it, we documented the failure instead of questioning the standard. That's not an excuse. It's a fact. And it's something I need to say out loud because you deserve to hear it from the person who was about to throw you away. Eli's chin trembled. He locked it down. The mechanism was smoother now. Not the desperate clamp of a boy who couldn't afford to feel, but the controlled restraint of someone who is choosing to hold something private, not because he's afraid of it, but because some moments are too large for the room they happen in. Your probation is lifted, Hale said. You are a student in good standing at Ridgecrest Consolidated Middle School. Your IEP will be implemented fully starting next semester. And I've written a letter, addressed to the county court, recommending that your current guardianship arrangement be formalized. She slid an envelope across the desk. Raina picked it up. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were not. Miss Cross. Hale looked at her. Something passed between the two women. Not warmth, not friendship, but the mutual recognition of people who have fought each other and arrived at the same side. Take care of him. I have been. I know. That's why I wrote the letter. They left the school at 9:15. Eli walked through the double doors into the parking lot where 11 bikers stood beside 11 motorcycles, and the look on his face told them everything before a word was spoken. Truax nodded once. Devlin lit a cigarette and exhaled toward the sky. Sykes wrapped his prosthetic against the tank of his bike, a hollow, metallic sound that served as his version of applause. Cole, 27, 2 years patched, the one who had questioned the club's investment in a boy who wasn't blood, stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight and his eyes carrying something he would never name and didn't need to. He'd been wrong. He knew it. The knowing sat on his face like weather. No one cheered, no one embraced. The Saints stood in their formation and let the boy walk through them, and their silence was the loudest thing in the parking lot. The courthouse was 12 miles east. They rode in formation. The sound of 11 Harleys on the county road turned heads at every intersection, and the people of Ridgecrest who saw them, the feed store owner, the woman at the gas station, the retired teacher walking his dog, watched with the same expression. Not fear, not admiration, recognition. The recognition of something moving with purpose toward an outcome that mattered. The Ridgecrest County Courthouse was a brick building from the 1940s with columns that were decorative rather than structural, and a parking lot that had not been designed for motorcycles. The Saints filled it anyway. 11 bikes, nose-in, chrome, and leather against a backdrop of Hondas and Toyotas, and one county vehicle with a dent in the rear quarter panel. The hearing was at 10. Courtroom B, Judge Adrienne Tan. Petra Solano had briefed Reina on what to expect. Questions about the living arrangement, about finances, about the club's structure, about Eli's daily routine, the home study report, the school's letter, the assessment, everything distilled into a 45-minute proceeding that would determine whether a boy who had walked 3 miles in the dark to earn a sandwich would spend the rest of his childhood with the people who had answered. Reina entered the courtroom with Eli and Boone. Petra was already there, files arranged on the table with the precision of a surgeon's instruments. The courtroom smelled like old wood and the chemical cleaner they used on the floors and the particular institutional air that exists in buildings where people's lives are adjudicated between lunch and closing. Darla Mercer was sitting in the second row. Eli saw her and stopped walking. She was thin. She was pale. She was wearing a dress that Reina recognized. It was the one from the closet in the bedroom, the one that had been folded on the chair for weeks, the one that belonged to a version of Darla that existed before the collapse. It didn't fit the way it once had. It hung on her frame like a memory of the body that used to fill it. But she was upright. Her hair was brushed. Her eyes, when they found Eli's, were present. Not fully, not with the brightness they'd once carried, but present enough. The pilot light still burning. Eli walked to her, sat down beside her, didn't speak. His hand found hers on the bench between them, and their fingers interlaced, and the grip was mutual. Not strong, not confident, but mutual, two people holding on to each other with whatever they had left. The hearing began. Judge Tan was 61, former family law attorney, a face that had seen everything family courts produce. The worst of parents, the best of strangers, the infinite capacity of bureaucracy to miss what matters. She read the file, asked questions. Her voice was even, neutral, the voice of a person who had disciplined herself to withhold judgment until the evidence was complete. Petra presented the case, the school letter, the IEP, the attendance record, the assessment, the home study. She called Reina as the primary petitioner. Reina took the stand and answered every question with the same economy she brought to everything. No wasted words, no embellishment, the plain language of a woman who believed that facts, properly arranged, were their own argument. Then the judge asked about the consent form. Ms. Cross, the record shows a parental consent form signed by Darla Mercer authorizing the learning disability assessment. Mrs. Mercer, she looked at Darla, were you aware of this form? The courtroom tightened. Reina's hands, resting on the witness box, went still. Boone, sitting in the front row, pressed his palms flat against his thighs. Devlin, 3 seats back, stopped breathing. Darla looked at Reina, then at the judge, then at her son, who sat beside her with his hand still in hers, his face carrying the specific tension of a boy who understood more than anyone knew and was waiting to see which version of the truth the adults would choose. I was aware, Darla said. Her voice was thin, but it was there. I asked Ms. Cross to handle the paperwork because I wasn't able to go to the office myself at the time. The lie landed in the courtroom like a stone in a pond. A single disturbance, ripples moving outward in all directions, changing the surface without breaking it. Reina's jaw tightened. She hadn't asked Darla to say this, hadn't coached her. The woman who couldn't get out of bed 3 weeks ago had just committed perjury to protect the woman who had committed forgery to protect her son. Judge Tan studied Darla for a long moment. The kind of look that sees through the surface and into the architecture beneath it. The support beams, the load-bearing walls, the cracks that are structural and the cracks that are cosmetic. Whatever she saw, she wrote something on her notepad and moved on. Boone was called next. He took the stand with his hands in his pockets, hiding the tremor, and answered questions about the reading program, the mentorship, the daily structure at the compound. When the judge asked what qualified him to provide academic support to a minor, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm a Marine. I was trained to adapt to conditions on the ground. The condition on the ground was a kid who couldn't read but could strip an engine blind. So I adapted. I met him where he was. I didn't make him come to me." And the results? He went from second grade reading level to fourth in 60 days. He went from zero attendance to perfect. He went from tearing up books to carrying one in his backpack every day. Boone's voice was steady, but his right hand, still hidden in his pocket, was shaking hard enough that the fabric vibrated. I don't have a teaching certificate. I have a DD-214 and a socket wrench set, and more patience than I used to think I was capable of. That's what I'm qualified with. Judge Ton looked at him, then at Raina, then at Eli, who sat in the second row between his mother and the absence of his father, a boy who had been failed by every system designed to catch him, and caught by a system that wasn't designed for anything except surviving. I'm going to recess for 20 minutes, the judge said. I'll have my decision when we reconvene. 20 minutes. 1,200 seconds. They waited in the hallway. Raina and Boone and Eli and Darla and Petra, and outside the courthouse doors, 11 bikers who stood in the cold and didn't speak because the specific discipline of brotherhood is knowing when silence serves better than noise. Eli stood by the window. He could see the parking lot, the Harleys. Truax leaning against his Road King, arms crossed, face lifted toward the sky as if checking the weather or asking the clouds a question that didn't have an answer. Devlin pacing. Sykes sitting on a bench, his prosthetic extended, tapping the titanium toe against the concrete in a rhythm that might have been nervousness or might have been music. Boone stood beside the boy, not speaking. His hand had come out of his pocket, and the tremor was visible, the involuntary shaking that had followed him home from a valley in Helmand province and had never fully mustered out. Eli looked at the hand, then looked at Boone's face. "Does it ever stop?" the boy asked. Boone looked at his hand, then at the boy. "Some days are better, some are worse. Today's a worse day." "Why?" "Because today matters, and my body doesn't know the difference between something that matters because it's dangerous and something that matters because it's important. It just knows that the stakes are high, and it responds the only way it learned how." Eli reached out and put his hand over Boone's. The boy's hand, small, calloused, the nails bitten short, the knuckles stained with engine grease that never fully washed out, covered the shaking fist of a man 3 times his size. The tremor didn't stop, but it changed. The frequency shifted, slower, less erratic, as if the contact had introduced a new variable into the equation and the system was recalculating. They stood like that until the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Judge Tan took her seat. The courtroom resettled. Raina at the table, Petra beside her, Eli and Darla in the second row, Boone at the end. The judge opened a folder. Read from it. Her voice was the same, even, calibrated instrument it had been all morning, but underneath it, in the spaces between the legal phrases and procedural language, there was something else. Not warmth, precision. The precision of a person who has decided. In the matter of the petition for legal guardianship of the minor Eli Mercer, I have reviewed the home study, the school's assessment, the psychological evaluation, and the testimony presented today. I have also reviewed the current home situation with the biological parent, Mrs. Darla Mercer. She looked at Darla. "Mrs. Mercer, you are not losing your parental rights. This court recognizes that you are dealing with significant challenges, and the guardianship being granted today is a supportive measure, not a punitive one. You retain the right to petition for modification as your circumstances change." Then she looked at Raina. "Ms. Cross, this court is granting temporary legal guardianship of Eli Mercer to you, effective immediately, for a period of 12 months, subject to quarterly review. This arrangement is contingent on continued school attendance, continued academic support, and cooperation with the county's family preservation services." Raina's hands were flat on the table. She pressed them harder. The wood grain bit into her palms. "I want to say something off the record," the judge said. She removed her glasses. "I've sat in this courtroom for 19 years. I have seen every version of failure that adults are capable of when it comes to children. What I see in front of me today is not a perfect situation. It is not a conventional situation, but it is a situation in which a child who was falling was caught by people who had no obligation to catch him and every reason not to. That matters. In this courtroom and outside of it, that matters." She put her glasses back on, picked up her gavel. The sound it made when it struck was small, a single, clean knock, wood on wood, but it traveled through the courtroom and into the hallway and through the courthouse doors and across the parking lot where 11 bikers heard it the way they heard everything. Not with their ears, with the part of them that had been waiting. Truax straightened. Devlin stopped pacing. Sykes stood up from the bench. The courthouse doors opened. Raina came out first, then Eli, then Boone and Darla and Petra. Raina's face carried nothing, no expression, no relief, no triumph. She walked down the courthouse steps with the controlled stride of a woman who had just won something and knew that winning was not the same as finishing. Then she stopped, looked at the 11 bikers standing beside their machines, looked at the boy beside her, looked at the sky, gray, cold, the same sky that had watched over every morning of the last 60 days, the same sky that didn't care about courtrooms or custody orders or the invisible architecture of people holding each other together. She nodded. Truax's fist hit the air once. Devlin's cigarette sailed into the parking lot in a trajectory that carried 60 days of tension with it. Sykes rapped his prosthetic against the bench, that hollow, metallic sound, and this time it was definitely applause. Cole walked up to Eli, stood in front of him. The two of them, the young biker who had questioned the club's investment and the boy who was the investment, looked at each other for a moment that was longer than it needed to be and shorter than it felt. "You earned it, kid," Cole said. Eli looked at him. "I know." Cole's mouth did something complicated. Then he extended his hand. Eli shook it. The handshake was brief, firm, two grips that said everything the words around them didn't. They rode back to the compound. 12 bikes this time. Darla rode behind Truax, her arms around his waist, her eyes wide with the specific terror and exhilaration of a woman who had not been outside her house in weeks and was now traveling at 50 miles an hour on a machine she didn't understand, held in place by a man she didn't know, surrounded by the sound of engines that vibrated in her chest like a second heartbeat. The compound was warm when they arrived. The diner lights were on. Someone, Merritt probably, the wiry mechanic who never said much but noticed everything, had started the coffee and turned on the flat-top grill and set the tables with the mismatched plates and mugs that constituted the Iron Saints dinnerware. They ate together. All of them. 11 members, one boy, one mother, one lawyer, who had been invited and who sat between Sykes and Devlin and drank her coffee with the expression of a woman who had expected to be uncomfortable and discovered she wasn't. Raina cooked. Eli helped, working the flat top with the instinct and precision that had become his signature, flipping eggs with a wrist motion that was pure Raina, plating bacon with a spacing that was pure discipline, assembling sandwiches that carried the specific identity of a boy who understood food the way he understood engines, as a system of relationships, of balances, of components that work together or not at all. The sandwich, the one from the beginning, the one he'd earned. Thick-cut bacon, fried egg, sharp cheddar on sourdough grilled until the edges were dark and crisp. He made 12 of them, one for each person, each one identical, each one carrying the memory of a morning when a starving boy walked into a place he didn't belong and said 5 words that changed everything. "Let me earn a sandwich." They ate in the specific silence that exists between people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. The clink of mugs, the scrape of plates, the sound of Truax laughing at something Devlin muttered, a low, rusty sound that rumbled through the diner like a small earthquake. The sound of Darla, quiet, thin, fragile, but present, sipping coffee and watching her son move through the kitchen with the competence and confidence of someone who has found the place where his abilities and his purpose intersect. After the meal, when the plates were cleared and the coffee was refilling, and the compound had settled into the particular frequency of late morning, when the urgency has passed, and what remains is the act of simply being in a place you belong. Boone stood up from the table. He walked to the coat hooks near the diner entrance, took something from his vest, the one hanging on the hook, the riding vest, the one with the patches and the insignia and the history of a man who had served and survived and found a second family in the wreckage of the first. He came back to the table, stood in front of Eli. In his hand was a patch, small, black border, white lettering on a dark field. 3 words stitched in a font that was neither decorative nor military, but something in between. The font of people who make things by hand and mean what they make. Earned, never given. "This doesn't go on a vest," Boone said. His voice was low, and the tremor was in it now. Not just his hands, but his voice. The vibration of a man who was saying something that cost him. "You're not a member. You're not a prospect. You're a kid, and you should stay a kid for as long as the world lets you. But this," he held up the patch, "this is yours, because you walked 3 miles in the dark, because you scrubbed 8 bikes in 11-degree cold, because you sat in a classroom that was never built for you, and you fought every word on every page, and you didn't quit. Not once. Not when it hurt. Not when it was easier to stop." He set the patch on the table in front of the boy. "No one gave you this. You earned it. And when you forget that, because you will, some days, because the world is good at making people forget what they're worth, you take this out and you hold it, and you remember that 11 people who had no reason to believe in you believed in you anyway. Not because you were easy to believe in, because you showed up." Eli looked at the patch. His hand moved toward it, stopped, moved again. His fingers touched the stitching, the raised letters, the texture of thread on canvas, the physical weight of something that represented more than its materials. He picked it up, held it in both hands, the way he'd held the repair manual that first day in the garage, the way he held things that mattered, carefully, completely, with the attention of someone who has learned that the things that save you are often small and easily missed. He didn't speak. His jaw was locked. His eyes were bright and full, and he was using every mechanism he had, every wall, every bolt, every load-bearing structure of self-control that 13 years of surviving had built, to keep the surface intact. Not because he was afraid to break, because some moments are so large that the only way to honor them is to hold them whole, without letting them spill, without diluting them with the inadequacy of words. Darla's hand found his shoulder. Her touch was light, a whisper of contact, the pressure of a woman who was relearning how to be physical in the world, who was reaching toward her son from across a distance that grief had built, and that she was slowly, brick by brick, beginning to dismantle. Raina watched from the kitchen. She stood with her back against the counter, a dish towel over her shoulder, her arms crossed. Her face carried nothing. Her eyes carried everything. 20 years of service, 2 deployments, 1 medical discharge, a field hospital where she held a 19-year-old private together with her hands, while his lungs filled with blood and his eyes asked her a question she couldn't answer. And the answer wouldn't have helped anyway, because some questions exist only to be carried. She had carried that boy across 20 years and 2 continents and into a compound in Ridgecrest County where she'd found another boy. Different face, different war, same wound. And she had done what she couldn't do before. She had shown up in time. Boone sat back down. His hands were on the table, the tremor visible. And he didn't hide them. For the first time in the 63 days since Eli Mercer had walked through the compound gate, Boone Keller let his hands shake in the open, in the light, in front of people who could see. The war in his nervous system continued. It would always continue. But the shame of it, the hiding, the constant negotiation between damage and dignity eased by 1 degree. Not cured, eased, the way a bolt eases when it's properly torqued. Not loose, not tight, but seated, held in place by the right amount of pressure. The compound settled into its rhythm. The afternoon came and went. Harleys started and stopped. The garage filled with the sound of tools and engines and the specific music of men working with their hands. The diner served dinner. Eli cooked. Raina supervised. Darla sat at the counter and watched her son move through the kitchen with the quiet astonishment of a woman seeing something she'd always known was there but had been too buried to recognize. At 7:30, Darla went home. Truax drove her. The truck pulled out of the compound and turned onto the county road, and the taillights shrank but didn't disappear. Not this time. Not the way they had when another person drove away from Eli and didn't come back. Darla waved from the passenger window. A small wave. The kind a person makes when they're not sure the gesture will be seen, but they make it anyway, because hope is a muscle that atrophies without use. Eli watched until the truck was gone. Then he went back inside. The diner emptied. Members drifted to the clubhouse, to the garage. to the places where their private lives existed within the larger life of the Brotherhood. The lights in the diner dimmed. Raina turned off the overheads and left only the counter lights on, the warm amber glow that made the old plank floors look golden and the scarred wooden tables look like something from a photograph of a place that doesn't exist anymore but should. Eli sat at the counter. The patch was in his hands. He turned it over, ran his thumb across the stitching. The letters were raised, tactile, readable, by touch, even in the dark. Earned, never given. He didn't need to read them. He knew them the way he knew engine parts, by feel, by weight, by the relationship between the shape and what it meant. Raina poured 2 cups of coffee, sat down across from him. The diner was empty. The compound was quiet. Outside, the Harleys were dark shapes in the gravel lot, cooling, settling, the metal contracting in the night cold with soft ticks that sounded like a conversation held at a volume too low for humans to decipher. "You need to go home," Raina said. "I know. Your mom needs you there tonight. I know. Boone will drive you." Eli nodded. He held the coffee in both hands. The steam rose between them, thin and temporary, disappearing into the air that smelled like bacon and coffee and wood and leather and the specific, indefinable scent of a place that has been lived in by people who belong to each other. Raina. What? The form. The consent form. "I know you signed it. I've known since the truck. And I know what she did today, my mom, in the courtroom. I know she lied." Raina's hands were around her own mug. She didn't move. The counterlight caught the scars on her forearms, the parallel lines, the suture marks, the topography of a body that had been rebuilt in the field by hands that were also her own. "I know why you did it," Eli said, "and I know why she did it, and I'm not going to tell anyone. But I need you to know that I know. Because you told me not to carry things alone. And that's a thing I'm carrying." Raina looked at him, 13 years old, sitting at a diner counter at 8 o'clock at night, holding a coffee cup he was too young for, and a truth he was too young for, and a patch that represented a commitment from men and women who had lived through things he couldn't imagine, and who had chosen, against every instinct of self-preservation, to let a stranger's child into the only safe place they had. "Okay," she said. "Then we carry it together." He nodded, finished the coffee, set the mug on the counter with a small, clean sound. Ceramic on formica, the period at the end of a sentence. Boone pulled up outside in his truck at 8:15. Eli walked to the door, stopped, turned. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Raina picked up his mug, washed it, set it on the drying rack beside hers. "Same time tomorrow." The boy walked out. The door closed behind him. The truck's headlights swept across the compound as it turned, illuminating the row of Harleys, the garage bay, the corrugated fence, the razor wire that caught the light and held it for an instant before releasing it into the dark. Then the headlights were gone and the compound was quiet. Raina stood alone in the diner. She turned off the counter lights. The room went dark except for the glow of the flat-top pilot light, a small blue flame that burned constant and low, the kind of flame that exists not to heat but to be ready. She stood in the dark and listened to the compound, the wind on the roof, the tick of cooling engines, the creak of the building settling into itself the way old structures do at night, adjusting to the absence of the people who give them purpose. She reached into her vest pocket, took out the card she'd given Hale 60 days ago, the one the principal had slid beneath the file folder, the one with the phone number and the address and the small Iron Saints insignia in the corner. She'd gotten it back after the hearing. Hale had returned it personally, pressing it into Raina's hand in the courthouse hallway with a grip that was firm and brief and carried the weight of something that neither woman would ever name. Raina set the card on the counter, looked at it in the pilot light's glow. Then she picked it up and put it back in her pocket, where it sat against her chest, close to the scars, close to the heartbeat, close to the place where the things she carried lived. She locked the diner door, crossed the gravel lot. The cold pressed against her face, and the sky above was clear for the first time in weeks. Stars visible, distant, indifferent, and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they don't know they're being watched. In the morning, the Harleys would rumble awake. Coffee would steam beneath fluorescent lights. Boots would cross old wooden floors. Leather jackets would creak in the cold air, and scarred hands would wrap around warm mugs, and the iron saints would gather at their tables the way they always did. Quiet, damaged, dangerous to anyone who threatened the people they'd claimed, and gentle in the ways that mattered, in the ways that no one outside the fence would ever see. And before any of them arrived, a boy would be in the kitchen, cracking eggs, grilling bread, preparing breakfast for anyone who came through the door hungry, because he remembered what empty felt like, and he'd made sure no one at his table ever would.